They say your wedding day is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. Mine started with my phone buzzing at 6 a.m, a video call from my golden child sister, mascara streaming down her face, screaming that I'd ruined everything. But let me back up. 7 months earlier, I'd chosen August 15th as my wedding date. Simple, meaningful, mine. Then, my sister, who'd been the centre of our family's universe for 32 years, announced she'd be getting married the exact same day. When I reminded her I'd already claimed it, she just smiled and said, "You can change yours right." My parents agreed. "Sophie needs us more. You understand." I replied with 2 words, "I understand." What they didn't understand was what those words actually meant. Because on August 15th, while my sister's wedding descended into chaos, my parents drove to my venue expecting to find a small, sad ceremony. Instead, they walked into something that left them absolutely speechless. What they saw that day didn't just shock them, it changed our family forever. And trust me, by the end of this story, you'll understand why I smiled when I said those 2 words. This is the story of how I stopped being invisible. My name is Heather Simmons. I'm 32 years old, and for the past 6 years, I've worked as an interior design manager at a boutique firm in Seattle. On paper, my life looks pretty good. Successful career, financial independence, a small circle of genuine friends. But if you'd asked me a year ago whether I felt truly seen by the people who were supposed to love me most, I wouldn't have known how to answer. Because the truth is, I'd spent so long being invisible in my own family that I'd almost convinced myself it didn't matter anymore. Almost. The pattern started early. I can still remember my 10th birthday with painful clarity. I'd spent weeks preparing for that day, not because I wanted a party or presents, but because I'd earned straight A's for the first time and wanted to give a little speech at dinner, thanking my parents for their support. I practiced in front of my mirror every night, imagining their proud faces. I was so naive. That evening I stood at the dining room table with my report card in trembling hands, ready to share my achievement. But before I could get 3 words out, my mother interrupted. "That's wonderful, honey, but we need to leave in 15 minutes for Sophie's piano recital. You know how important tonight is for your sister." Sophie was 7 at the time, and her recital was at the community centre, a beginner's showcase where she'd eventually play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star with at least a dozen wrong notes. But it was her moment, and in our family, Sophie's moments always took precedence. We never did hear my speech. My report card got a distracted "good job, sweetie," as Mum rushed to curl Sophie's hair. I put my prepared notes in my desk drawer, and I never wrote another speech again. That night taught me something crucial in my family achievement. Didn't guarantee love or attention. Being the golden child did, and that title belonged exclusively to my younger sister. The pattern continued through every stage of my life. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, the family celebration lasted about an hour before shifting to discuss Sophie's upcoming junior prom dress shopping. When I got my first promotion at 25, my parents spent 5 minutes congratulating me during our weekly phone call, then spent the next 45 minutes dissecting Sophie's latest boyfriend drama. It wasn't malicious, they genuinely didn't seem to notice the imbalance. To them, I was the easy child who had everything figured out while Sophie needed constant support and intervention. Family gatherings became predictable theatre. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, every holiday followed the same script. I'd arrive on time, help with cooking and setup, make pleasant conversation with relatives who barely remembered what I did for a living. Meanwhile, Sophie would show up late, often with some crisis in tow, and immediately become the centre of attention. Our parents would orbit around her like she was the sun, and I was just another planet in the distant outer rings, present, but not particularly noticed. I learned to cope by building a life that didn't require their validation. I excelled at work because my bosses actually recognised my contributions. I cultivated friendships with people who valued my presence. I dated men who saw me as someone worth prioritising, I created a world where my worth wasn't constantly questioned or diminished. For years, this strategy worked. I told myself I'd outgrown the need for parental approval. I'd made peace with being the responsible, independent daughter who didn't require attention. But I was lying to myself. I had accepted my role as the invisible daughter. But what happened next would force me to finally choose myself. That turning point came in January in the form of a corporate office redesign project and a man named Michael Chen. He was 38, 6 years older than me, with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from surviving hard things and coming out wiser. We met when his tech company hired my firm to renovate their downtown Seattle headquarters. During our first consultation, while other executives postured and interrupted, Michael actually listened. He asked thoughtful questions about functionality and employee well-being, not just aesthetics. He took notes. He remembered details I'd mentioned in passing during previous meetings. It sounds simple, but after a lifetime of being half heard by my own family, being fully listened to felt revolutionary. Our professional relationship evolved naturally over 3 months of project meetings. We'd grab coffee after presentations, talking about everything from design philosophy to our favourite hidden spots in Seattle. He told me about his divorce 3 years earlier, how his ex-wife had been honest enough to admit she'd fallen out of love before either of them wasted more years pretending. He spoke about his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, with such tenderness that I could see how much fatherhood had shaped him. There was no bitterness in his stories, just acceptance and a determination to build something better. I found myself opening up in ways I rarely did. I told him about my family dynamics, expecting the usual platitudes about how parents do their best or siblings grow out of rivalry. Instead, Michael said something that stuck with me. "You know, Heather, the people who love us shouldn't make us feel like we're asking for too much when we simply want to be seen." And that sentence cracked something open in me. Our first official date was a walk through Discovery Park on a February afternoon when the sky was that particular Seattle grey that makes everything feel intimate. We talked for 4 hours, wandering trails until our fingers were numb from cold. When he finally kissed me at the overlook, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. Meeting Lily happened a month later and I was terrified. I'd never been around children much and the stakes felt enormous. This wasn't just dating Michael, it was potentially becoming part of a small, carefully protected family unit. But Lily made it easy. She was curious and funny, with her father's thoughtful way of listening. She showed me her rock collection, explained the complex social hierarchy of 3rd grade, and asked if I liked pizza because that was her favourite food, and it would be good if we agreed on important things. 3 months into our relationship, Lily drew a picture during one of our weekend afternoons together. She worked on it with intense concentration, while Michael and I cooked a shouted dinner, her tongue poking out slightly the way children do when they're focused. When she finished, she presented it to me solemnly, a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house. Above it, in her careful 8-year-old handwriting, she'd written "My future family." The figures were labelled Dad, me, and Heather. I had to excuse myself to the bathroom because tears were streaming down my face. For the first time in my life, I felt genuinely needed, not as a supporting character in someone else's story, but as an essential part of something beautiful. Lily hadn't added me as an afterthought. I was right there in the centre, holding hands with both of them. That's when I understood what I'd been missing. Not just romantic love, but the feeling of being chosen deliberately and celebrated openly. Michael proposed in August, exactly 1 year after our first walk through Discovery Park. No elaborate production, no surprise flash mob, just the 2 of us returning to the overlook where we'd first kissed with Lily, waiting back at his apartment with her grandmother practically vibrating with the secret she'd been keeping for 2 weeks. He told me that loving me had taught him that second chances could be even better than first ones, that building a family wasn't about perfection, but about showing up honestly every single day. When I said yes, I meant it with every part of myself. We chose August 15th as our wedding date, our anniversary, a date that belonged to us and our story. It felt symbolic, like we were creating our own traditions rather than following someone else's script. I designed save the date cards myself, elegant and simple, and mailed them to our combined guest list in early January. When I sent one to my parents, I allowed myself a small hope that maybe this time would be different. Maybe my wedding would be the occasion when they'd finally see me as someone worth celebrating. I even shared the news with Eleanor Whitmore, one of my most valued clients, during a project follow-up meeting. Eleanor was a 68-year-old widow who'd hired me to redesign her penthouse the previous year, and we developed an unexpected friendship. She had a way of really seeing people that reminded me of Michael. When I showed her my engagement ring, her eyes lit up. "You must come to tea next week," she insisted. "I want to hear everything about this young man who's made you glow like this." That evening I told Michael about Eleanor's invitation. She said something interesting when I left. I mentioned as we washed dinner dishes together. She told me I remind her of herself when she was young. I'm not sure what she meant by that. Michael dried his hands and pulled me close. "Maybe she sees something in you that your family hasn't noticed yet. People who've lived full lives tend to recognize strength when they see it." I thought choosing our own anniversary date would protect it from family drama. 2 months later, I realized I was wrong. March arrived with that particular Pacific Northwest brightness that makes you forget the grey winter entirely. Michael and I had started the pleasant work of wedding planning, nothing elaborate, just an intimate celebration that felt authentically us. We'd begun researching venues, making preliminary guest lists, discussing whether we wanted a DJ or a small band. Everything felt manageable and joyful, the way planning a wedding should feel. Then, my phone rang on a Tuesday evening with a FaceTime call from Sophie. I was at Michael's place, helping Lily with a book report while he cooked dinner. When I saw my sister's name flash across the screen, I felt that familiar tension in my shoulders, the involuntary response to a lifetime of being the supporting actress in her dramas. But I answered with genuine warmth. Despite everything, I loved my sister. I just wished loving her didn't always require making myself smaller. Sophie's face filled the screen radiant and practically vibrating with excitement. "Heather, oh my God, I have the most amazing news." She was sitting in what looked like a coffee shop, her boyfriend Brad visible in the background, looking slightly uncomfortable. Brad proposed we're getting married. I felt genuine happiness for her. "Sophie, that's wonderful. Congratulations, when did this happen?" "Last weekend, he took me to that restaurant on the waterfront, the one with the view, and it was so romantic. We've already started planning because we want to do this soon." She paused dramatically, her smile growing wider. "We're getting married August 15th. The world seemed to tilt slightly. I must have misheard. "Wait, did you say August 15th? "Yes, isn't that perfect? I know it's soon, but we don't want a long engagement. We found this gorgeous church, St. Catherine's, and they only had that one date available for the summer. You know how booking venues is?" She said this as if she'd just discovered a universal truth about wedding planning that I couldn't possibly understand. I kept my voice steady, aware that Michael had gone still at the stove and Lily was watching me with curious eyes. "Sophie, that's my wedding date. We sent out save the dates 2 months ago. You got one." There was the briefest flicker of something across her face, awareness, maybe even calculation, before it vanished beneath practiced innocence. "Oh, did you... I remember getting something, but I didn't realize it was set in stone. You guys are so flexible and laid back. Can't you just change yours?" St. Catherine's is the only church that feels right, and they literally only have this one date before next year. You could move yours by a week or 2, right? It's not like you've paid deposits yet. The assumption in that statement took my breath away. She had no idea what we'd planned or paid for, but she'd simply assumed we could and would rearrange our lives to accommodate her. Again. "Sophie, we chose August 15th, specifically because it's our anniversary. It has meaning for us." I tried to keep my tone reasonable, not accusatory. "There are dozens of beautiful churches in the Seattle area. Maybe Brad could check with some other venues." Her expression shifted to something hurt and defensive. "I can't believe you're being like this. This is my wedding, Heather. I found my dream venue. Why are you making this difficult? Behind me, I heard Michael set down a pan with more force than necessary. He walked over and stood where Sophie could see him on the screen. Hi, Sophie. Michael here. The reason Heather is mentioning this is because we chose that date a year ago. We've already booked our venue and sent announcements to over 60 people. Perhaps you and Brad could consider one of the many other available dates. Sophie's eyes went wide, and I could see her recalculating. She wasn't used to anyone outside our immediate family failing to defer to her needs. But we've already told Brad's family. His parents are so excited about St. Catherine's. This is getting really complicated. Then maybe you should have checked with your sister before announcing the date, Michael said evenly. Sophie's face flushed. You know what I need to go. We'll figure this out later. She ended the call abruptly. I sat there staring at my blank phone screen, feeling a familiar knot forming in my stomach. Lily, perceptive as always, came over and hugged me without saying anything. Michael squeezed my shoulder, his jaw tight with barely contained anger. That was deliberate, he said quietly. She knew your date. She chose it anyway. I wanted to defend my sister to find an innocent explanation, but I couldn't. The way she'd so casually suggested I change everything, the assumption that my plans were negotiable while hers were sacred, it was too familiar a pattern to ignore. My phone buzzed with a text. Mum. Honey, Sophie just called me crying. You know how stressed she gets about changes. Since you and Michael are more flexible and easygoing, could you move your date by a week or two? It would help the family so much. Sophie really has her heart set on St. Catherine's, and you know how she gets when she's disappointed. Let me know what you decide. I stared at the message, noting everything it contained and everything it didn't. There was no question about whether changing our date would be easy for us. No acknowledgement that we'd claimed the date first. No suggestion that Sophie could be the one to compromise. Just the automatic assumption that I would be the one to bend. Because I always had before. That night, lying in bed, I finally articulated something I'd known for years but never said aloud. This wasn't about wedding dates or church availability. This was about my family's fundamental belief that Sophie's wants would always outweigh my needs, that my feelings were always negotiable, that I existed to make her life easier. Michael held me as I cried angry, frustrated tears. You don't have to change anything, he whispered. Your date, your plans, your choice. I texted my mother back. I'll think about it and let you know. But I already knew what my answer would be. I told them I'd think about it. But a week later, Sophie's secret came out and everything made sense. The truth came out in the most mundane way possible. A casual phone conversation with my cousin Jennifer during my lunch break the following Thursday. Jennifer and I had always been closer than Sophie and I, in many ways despite the 5-year age gap. She lived in Portland now working as a nurse, and we tried to catch up every few weeks. That day, she called me excited about some hospital gossip, and the conversation meandered pleasantly through various family updates before she said almost offhandedly, I'm so glad Sophie and Brad are making it official before the baby comes. Mum would have lost her mind if Sophie showed up to Thanksgiving visibly pregnant without a ring. I stopped mid-bite of my salad. Wait, baby. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Oh no, Heather, please tell me you knew. Please tell me I didn't just... Sophie's pregnant. My voice came out sharper than I intended. Jennifer exhaled slowly. She's about 3 months along. I thought you knew. I thought that's why they were rushing the wedding. Your mum told my mum last week, and I just assumed it was common knowledge in the family by now. Of course, my mother had told her sister. Of course, the extended family had been informed. But not me. Never me. I was the one expected to accommodate the situation without being trusted with the actual reason for it. After I hung up with Jennifer, who apologised profusely for the accidental reveal, I sat in my car in the parking lot of my office building and let the pieces fall into place. Brad's family was strict Catholic. Sophie had mentioned that several times while they were dating, usually in the context of feeling judged by his mother. A rushed wedding before the pregnancy became obvious would save face for everyone involved. And if there were 2 family weddings in August, people would focus on comparing venues and flowers rather than counting backward from Sophie's due date. She'd chosen my date deliberately, not out of spite necessarily, but out of calculated self-preservation. My wedding was supposed to be her camouflage. The realization hit me with a strange mixture of anger and something uncomfortably close to pity. I understood fear of judgment. I understood the pressure of family expectations. I'd spent my entire life trying to live up to standards that shifted depending on which daughter was being measured. But understanding Sophie's panic didn't make her choice less hurtful. She had decided to solve her problem by creating one for me, banking on the fact that I'd always been the one to step aside. That evening, I told Michael everything. We were at his place again with Lily already asleep upstairs, after an evening of helping her build an elaborate Lego castle. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled as I explained what I'd learned. "So she's using your wedding as a distraction," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "She created a problem for herself, and instead of dealing with it honestly, she's trying to solve it by trampling over your boundaries." "She's scared," I heard myself say, falling into the old pattern of defending her. "Brad's family is going to judge her. Our family has always put so much pressure on appearances. She probably feels like she doesn't have options." Michael took my hands gently. "Heather, listen to me. Being scared doesn't give anyone permission to hurt others. Your sister is an adult who made adult choices. Getting pregnant happens. It's not a scandal, and it's not something she should be ashamed of. But the way she's handling it, using you as a shield, expecting you to rearrange your life to make hers easier, that's not okay." "I know," I whispered. "I know it's not okay. But if I don't change my date, my whole family is going to see me as selfish and difficult. Or," Michael said quietly, "they'll finally see that you have boundaries, that your needs matter as much as Sophie's wants. Maybe it's time they learned that lesson." He pulled me close, and I rested my head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Your sister needs to learn to face consequences instead of hiding behind you. That's not cruelty. That's actually the kindest thing you could do for her in the long run, even if she doesn't see it that way now." I thought about Lily's drawing the 3 stick figures labelled "My Future Family." I thought about how Michael had stood up for me during that video call with Sophie, how he'd never once suggested that my feelings were less important than keeping the peace. I thought about the life I was building, one where I was seen valued and celebrated. And I thought about the life I'd always lived, where my role was to be understanding, flexible, and ultimately invisible. For the first time, I felt something shift inside me. Not just acceptance of my family's patterns, but actual resistance. The old Heather would have changed her date already, would have sent an apologetic text to Sophie, would have convinced herself that being the bigger person meant making herself smaller. But that version of me was exhausted from carrying burdens that were never mine to bear. I decided I wouldn't change my date. This was my wedding, my anniversary, my choice. Sophie's situation was unfortunate, but it wasn't my emergency to solve. She could choose another date, another venue, another solution that didn't require me to sacrifice something meaningful. I spent the weekend drafting a careful response to my mother's text, one that was kind but firm. I planned to send it Monday morning to give myself time to be absolutely certain of my decision. But before I could tell anyone, my parents made an announcement that felt like a slap across my face. Sunday evening, my phone lit up with a family video call request. My parents wanted to talk to both Sophie and me together, which was unusual enough to make my stomach clench with anxiety. I accepted the call from Michael's living room, where I'd been helping Lily practice her spelling words. My parents' faces appeared on screen, looking serious and determined. Sophie was in a separate box, her expression a carefully constructed mixture of sadness and resignation that I recognised from childhood, the face she made when she wanted sympathy but was trying to appear brave. "Girls, we need to discuss the August 15th situation," my father began using his mediator voice. Your mother and I have given this a lot of thought, and we've made a decision that we think is best for everyone. I felt Michael move closer behind me, his presence steadying. We've decided to attend Sophie's wedding, Mum continued, not quite meeting my eyes through the camera. Sweetheart, you have to understand your sister is pregnant and emotionally fragile right now. She needs our support during this stressful time. You're so much more mature and independent. We knew you'd understand. The words landed like physical blows. Not, we wish we could be at both, not, this breaks our hearts. Not even, we're sorry. Just the assumption that I would understand that my feelings about my own wedding day were secondary to Sophie's needs. Besides, my mother added, and I could hear the slight defensiveness creeping into her tone. You're marrying a divorced man with a child. You probably don't need parents at that kind of wedding anyway, right? It's not like it's a traditional first wedding for both of you. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Sophie's face carefully. Was that a flicker of discomfort? But she said nothing. Didn't object to our mother's dismissal of Michael, or the implication that my wedding was somehow lesser because we both came with histories. Michael's hand tightened on my shoulder, and I could feel the anger radiating from him. But when I spoke, my voice came out calm, almost eerily so. I understand, I said simply. Oh, good for her. Good. Mom said, relief flooding her features. We knew you'd be reasonable about this. You always are. So you'll change your date then? I didn't say that. I said I understand. I ended the call before anyone could respond. For a moment, I just sat there staring at my blank phone screen. Then the dam broke, and I started crying. Not delicate tears, but raw, ugly sobs that came from somewhere deep and wounded. Michael pulled me into his arms, and I buried my face against his chest, finally letting myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. My parents had chosen. After 32 years of choosing Sophie over and over again, they'd done it one more time on what should have been one of the most important days of my life. And worse, my mother had casually diminished Michael, and Lily had reduced our family to something less than because it didn't fit her traditional picture. I felt small hands on my arm and looked up to see Lily standing there, her face scrunched with concern. She'd come downstairs so quietly I hadn't heard her. She looked between me and her father, then asked in that direct way children have of cutting through pretense, "Why doesn't your mum love you?" The question stopped my tears immediately. Michael started to gently redirect her, but I held up my hand. Lily deserved an honest answer, even if it hurt to give it. She does love me, sweetie, I said, wiping my eyes. But sometimes parents don't know how to love all their children equally. They don't mean to hurt anyone, but they do anyway. That's not fair, Lily said firmly. You're really nice. You help me with homework, and you make good cookies, and you laugh at Dad's bad jokes. If I was a mum, I'd want you at my wedding. Something about her fierce, uncomplicated loyalty made me start crying again, but this time with a strange mixture of grief and gratitude. This 8-year-old girl saw my worth more clearly than the people who'd raised me. That night I cried myself to sleep in Michael's arms, mourning not just my parents' choice, but the final death of my hope that things might ever be different. But the hurt wasn't finished yet. 3 days later, on Wednesday afternoon, my father called. His tone was businesslike, almost transactional, which should have warned me. Heather, I wanted to discuss the financial aspect of the wedding situation, he began. Your mother and I had set aside $15,000 for your wedding, as you know. But given that we won't be attending and considering that Sophie is going to have a baby and needs to establish her household, we've decided to reallocate those funds to your sister instead. Yes, bye. I actually pulled the phone away from my ear to stare at it, certain I must have misheard. You're taking away the money you promised me and giving it to Sophie, I asked slowly. It's not taking away, he said, sounding defensive. It's reallocating resources to where they're most needed. Sophie is starting a family. She needs our support, both emotional and financial. You and Michael are both established in your careers. You'll be fine. What he didn't mention was that Sophie had already received $30,000 for her wedding, double what they'd allocated for mine. And now, even that reduced amount was being transferred to her. The financial inequality was so stark it was almost laughable. "Does Sophie know you're doing this?" I asked. "It was actually her suggestion," he admitted. "She said since we weren't coming to your wedding anyway, it seemed silly to leave that money sitting there unused when she has so many expenses coming up." Of course, it was her suggestion. My sister had orchestrated the whole thing beautifully, steal my date, claim the parental presents, and now take the money too. And my parents, as always, had simply said yes to whatever Sophie wanted. Michael came home to find me sitting at his kitchen table, staring at our wedding budget spreadsheet with tears streaming down my face. We'd been planning carefully allocating funds for venue rental, catering, flowers, photography. $15,000 was nearly a third of our total budget. Losing it meant cutting significant elements, maybe the live music we'd wanted, or the professional photographer, or the nicer venue we'd been considering. "I'm calling them," Michael said immediately, his face flushed with anger. "This is financial manipulation and it's not okay. They can't just..." "Don't," I interrupted quietly. "Please don't. Heather, they're punishing you for not bending to Sophie's demands. They're trying to force you to either downgrade your wedding or postpone it so Sophie can have her moment alone. Can't you see that?" "Of course I see it," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat, exhausted. "I see it perfectly clearly. That's exactly what they're doing. They've shown me who they are, Michael. I finally believe them." He sat down across from me, taking my hands. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've spent 32 years making excuses for them, telling myself they didn't mean to hurt me, that they loved us equally, but expressed it differently, that I was being too sensitive. But this," I gestured at my phone, "this is deliberate. They're using money as leverage to control my choices, and I'm done pretending it's anything else." The shift I felt wasn't dramatic or empowering in the way movies make these moments seem. It was quiet and sad and final, like watching a door close that I'd been holding open my entire life, hoping someone would eventually walk through and really see me. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then Michael said softly, "We'll make it work. We'll have a beautiful wedding regardless. I promise you that." I nodded, but inside I felt hollow. It wasn't really about the money or even the wedding anymore. It was about the confirmation that I would always be the daughter whose needs were negotiable, whose feelings were dismissible, whose worth was contingent on how little space I took up. That night, I sat alone in the bathroom, quietly crying, trying to process the double blow of losing both my parents' presence and their financial support. I felt adrift, unmoored from the family I'd tried so hard to belong to. But when morning came, Eleanor called with an invitation that would transform everything. Eleanor's voice on the phone that Thursday morning was warm and concerned in a way that immediately brought fresh tears to my eyes. "Heather, dear, I hope I'm not calling too early. I ran into Patricia Chen at the gallery yesterday, Michael's mother, and she mentioned you've been having some family difficulties around the wedding planning. I wondered if you might have time for tea this afternoon. I'd very much like to see you." The kindness in her invitation, the genuine concern from someone who had no obligation to care about my problems, made something crack open in my chest. "I'd like that very much," I managed to say. Eleanor's penthouse was exactly as I'd left it after completing her redesigned 6 months earlier, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, the careful balance of modern and classic pieces that reflected her personality perfectly. But this time, instead of meeting in her formal sitting room, she led me to a smaller, more intimate space that opened onto her terrace. A tea service was already arranged, delicate porcelain cups and a selection of pastries from the French bakery I'd once mentioned loving. She'd remembered. This woman, who barely knew me, had remembered a casual comment about my favourite bakery. We sat together in the spring sunshine, and Eleanor poured tea with practised grace. For a few minutes, we spoke about neutral things, the cherry blossoms blooming in the park below a new exhibit at the art museum. Then she set down her cup and looked at me with those sharp, knowing eyes. Patricia told me your parents have chosen to attend your sister's wedding instead of yours, the same sister who deliberately scheduled her wedding on your date. It wasn't a question. And that they've withdrawn their financial support as well. I nodded, not trusting my voice. May I tell you a story? Eleanor asked gently. When I nodded again, she settled back in her chair, her gaze distant with memory. I had an older sister, Caroline. She was beautiful, charming, exactly the kind of daughter my parents had dreamed of. I was the awkward one, the bookish one, the one who asked too many questions and cared too much about business when I should have been focused on finding a husband. She smiled, but there was old pain in it. When our father died, he left everything to Caroline. The house, the business, the investments. I received $5,000 and a note saying he knew I was resourceful enough to make my own way. My mother agreed with his decision. Caroline needed the security, they said. I was strong enough to manage on my own. The parallel to my own situation was so obvious, it hurt. What happened? I asked quietly. Caroline squandered it all within 10 years. Bad investments, expensive lifestyle, a husband who saw her inheritance as his personal bank account. By the time she came to me for help, there was nothing left. Eleanor paused, sipping her tea. I'd built a small real estate business by then, buying distressed properties and renovating them. I'd made myself successful specifically to prove I didn't need their approval or their money. Did you help her? I asked. I did. I bought her a modest condo and set up a trust that gave her a monthly allowance she couldn't exhaust. But I didn't bail out her lifestyle or make her problems disappear. I helped her survive, not continue the patterns that destroyed her inheritance. Eleanor's eyes met mine. She resented me for years, told everyone I was cruel and unforgiving, but eventually she thanked me. Said I was the only one who'd ever treated her like an adult capable of learning from consequences. I thought about Sophie, about the lifetime of cushioning and excuse-making that had shaped her into someone who believed other people's boundaries were obstacles to be overcome rather than limits to be respected. My only regret, Eleanor continued, her voice softening, wasn't the money or attention I didn't get. It was how long I let them define my worth. I was almost 40 before I realised I was always enough exactly as I was. I'd built an empire trying to prove something to people who were never going to see me clearly, and in doing that, I nearly missed my own life. She leaned forward, taking my hand. Heather, I see you at that same crossroads. You're 32 years old, accomplished and kind and capable of extraordinary things. But you're still waiting for your parents to validate what's already true. You're still trying to prove you're worthy of love to people who've decided your sister's needs will always outweigh yours. The tears I'd been holding back spilled over. I don't know how to stop, I whispered. I don't know how to stop hoping they'll finally see me. You stopped by, choosing to see yourself, Eleanor said gently. You stopped by building a life so full of genuine love and respect that their approval becomes irrelevant. Not because you don't care about them, but because you finally care about yourself more. We talked for another hour, and Eleanor shared more about her journey, how she'd met her late husband at 42, how they'd built a beautiful life together in the years everyone said she'd wasted being single, how she'd learned that the family you choose is often more loyal than the family you're born into. When I left her penthouse, I felt different. Not healed, healing would take much longer, but seen in a way I desperately needed. That night, I sat at Michael's desk with my therapy journal, a practice my counsellor had recommended 2 years ago, during a particularly difficult period at work. I'd been inconsistent with it lately, but tonight the words poured out. I've spent 30 years trying to prove I'm worthy of love, I wrote. But to whom? To people who refuse to see me, to parents who've made it clear that my sister's comfort will always matter more than my pain, to a family system that requires me to be small so Sophie can feel big. Michael came up behind me, reading over my shoulder. I felt him tense as he absorbed what I'd written. Then his arms came around me, gentle and protective. "You don't need to prove anything," he said quietly. "You just need to be yourself. And yourself is more than enough. It's everything." I leaned back against him, feeling the truth of his words settle into my bones. Eleanor had walked this path before me. She'd survived being the overlooked daughter and built something real and lasting. And she was offering me something I'd never had from my own family, the belief that I deserved better simply because I existed, not because I'd earned it through perfect behaviour or endless accommodation. I slept better that night than I had in weeks, even with all the uncertainty about the wedding budget and my fractured family relationships. Something had shifted. I was beginning to see myself through different eyes. The next day, Eleanor called me back with an offer that seemed too generous to accept. Eleanor's voice on Friday afternoon was both gentle and determined, the combination I'd come to recognise as her particular brand of kindness, soft in delivery, but unyielding in intent. "Heather, I have a proposition for you and I need you to hear me out completely before you respond. Can you do that?" I was in my office reviewing fabric samples for a client project, but something in her tone made me set everything aside. "Of course. I own a property on Lake Washington that's been sitting vacant since I sold it to a tech executive last year. The sale fell through at the last minute. His company relocated him to San Francisco, and it's been in a legal holding pattern ever since. It's a beautiful estate with lakefront access, mature gardens, and a pavilion that was specifically designed for events. The previous owners hosted their daughter's wedding there 5 years ago." I could hear where this was going, and my throat tightened. "Eleanor, you promised to hear me out," she reminded me gently. "This property is just sitting there, Heather, empty, waiting, and you need a venue for August 15th. I'd like to offer it to you for your wedding." "I can't possibly accept that," I said immediately, my pride rising like a wall. "Do you know what a property like that would rent for? It would be tens of thousands of dollars. I can't take charity, Eleanor. I won't." "Is it charity when I ask you to design my spaces?" she countered. "Or when you share your expertise and talent with me? We all have different resources to offer, dear. I have property. You have dignity and strength and a love story that deserves to be celebrated properly." "But let me finish," she said, and there was steel beneath the warmth now. "I don't have children, Heather. My husband and I tried for years, but it wasn't meant to be. When I look at you, I see the daughter I might have had. Someone strong and kind and thoughtful. Someone who gives endlessly to others but struggles to receive. If I had a daughter, I'd hope she'd be like you. Let me do this, not out of pity, but because I believe you deserve to be celebrated. Let me be part of your family in the way yours refuses to be." That last sentence broke something open inside me. I sat there in my office, with tears streaming down my face, unable to speak. "I know it's hard for you to accept help," Eleanor continued softly. "You've been trained your whole life to be self-sufficient, to not ask for anything, to make yourself small and manageable. But accepting support from people who love you isn't weakness, it's trust. And I'm asking you to trust me." "It's too much," I whispered. "Eleanor, a venue like that would normally cost $50,000 or more to rent. I can't." "Then let's make an arrangement that feels right to you," she said practically. "You insist on paying for something. What feels manageable?" I thought about our decimated budget, about Michael's quiet worry over the spreadsheets, about the compromises we'd been discussing. I could pay for the catering and the florals. Maybe $5,000 total. That's what we'd budgeted for the smaller venue we were considering. "Done," Eleanor said. "You handle catering and florals. I provide the venue. My accountant will draw up a simple agreement. This is a gift completely legal under tax law." I have a lifetime gift exemption of over $13 million. This won't affect you financially at all, and it barely makes a dent in my estate planning. Why are you doing this? I asked, still struggling to accept such generosity. Because 30 years ago, someone did something similar for me, Eleanor said quietly. A business mentor who saw potential in me that my own family didn't. She co-signed my first commercial property loan when no bank would take a chance on a single woman in her 30s with no collateral. She told me, pay it forward someday. So I am. That evening, I told Michael about Eleanor's offer. We were at his kitchen table, Lily already asleep upstairs, the remains of dinner still scattered between us. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he reached across and took my hand. What do you want to do? He asked simply. I want to say yes, I admitted, but I feel like I'm taking advantage of her kindness. She's offering freely, Michael said. She's not rescuing you from some crisis you created. Your parents created this situation by withdrawing their support to manipulate you. Eleanor is offering you a different choice. That's not charity. That's love. Love. Such a simple word for such a complicated feeling. But he was right. This was what love looked like when it wasn't conditional, wasn't transactional, wasn't dependent on me making myself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. Over the next week, Eleanor and I worked out the details. Her accountant handled all the legal paperwork, ensuring everything was properly documented and tax compliant. I insisted on covering not just catering and florals, but also the music and photography elements that felt personally important to me. Eleanor agreed, but quietly arranged for her preferred event coordinator to handle logistics, at no charge, calling it a business favour she was cashing in. We decided to keep the full scope of the venue quiet. Close friends would know Michael's mother Patricia, my cousin Jennifer, a handful of colleagues who'd become genuine friends. But we wouldn't announce it publicly or inform extended family. Let them discover it on the day itself. I crafted a text message to my parents showing it to Michael first. He read it and nodded. I'm keeping my August 15th wedding date. I hope you all enjoy Sophie's day. I'll send photos afterward. Short, clear, final. No justification, no invitation for further discussion, no door left open for them to try to change my mind. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. My mother called within 20 minutes. I let it go to voicemail. She called 3 more times that evening. I didn't answer. Finally, she sent a text. We need to discuss this. You're being very stubborn. I didn't respond. Michael watched me silence my phone and set it face down on the counter, and I saw pride in his eyes. How does it feel? He asked. Terrifying, I admitted, and also free. Planning the wedding became something joyful again, instead of stressful. Eleanor introduced me to vendors who'd worked on her properties before, a florist who understood my vision immediately, a caterer who created a tasting menu that made Michael and me both tear up with how perfect it was. Everything felt aligned, intentional, right. I didn't post anything on social media about the venue. I didn't mention it in the family group chat that I'd muted, but not left. I simply moved forward, building something beautiful with people who actually wanted to celebrate us. What I didn't know was that while I was quietly planning something beautiful, Sophie was launching a campaign to destroy my reputation. The first post appeared on Sophie's Facebook page on a Tuesday morning in mid-May. I didn't see it immediately. I'd muted her updates months ago after one too many dramatic, vague posts about unnamed people who'd disappointed her. But my cousin Jennifer screenshot it and sent it to me with a single word, yikes. The post showed a photo of Sophie with her hand on her small baby bump, looking wistfully at the camera. The caption read, "So sad when family won't support each other during the hardest times. But I guess some people's happiness matters more than others. Praying for compassion and understanding, especially hard when you're pregnant and stressed, heartbroken but staying strong." The hashtags told the real story: pregnant and stressed family first sisters should support each other wedding drama. Within hours, the comments section filled with supportive messages from relatives and family friends who had no idea what was actually happening. Who hurt you, sweetie? Family should always come first. Some people are so selfish. My aunt commented, your sister should be ashamed of herself. Jennifer called me immediately. Heather, she's making you look like a monster. Half the family thinks you're refusing to help a pregnant woman. Should I comment and explain what really happened? No, I said, surprised by how calm I felt. Let her tell whatever story she needs to tell. The people who matter know the truth. But Sophie wasn't done. Over the next week, she posted 3 more variations on the same theme, vague complaints about unnamed family members, causing stress during her pregnancy, photos of herself, looking tearful with captions about staying positive despite everything, and shares of articles about the importance of family support during difficult times. The family group chat I'd muted exploded with activity. When I finally checked it, I found dozens of messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins taking sides. Some defended me, pointing out that I had chosen my date first. Others insisted I should be the bigger person and accommodate my pregnant sister. My mother had sent a long message explaining that both her daughters were getting married on the same day due to unfortunate timing, and asking everyone to send love to both girls. The revisionist history was breathtaking. No mention of Sophie deliberately choosing my date. No acknowledgement that I'd been planning for months before she even got engaged. Then, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. My florist called on a Wednesday afternoon sounding confused. Hi, Heather. I just wanted to confirm you're not postponing to October, right? Your assistant called yesterday asking to move everything, but I wanted to double check before I released your August date to another client. My stomach dropped. I don't have an assistant. What number did they call from? She read it back to me, a number I didn't recognize. When I called it, I got a generic Google Voice voicemail. 20 minutes later, my makeup artist called with the exact same story. Someone claiming to be my assistant had called asking to reschedule everything to October because I was having second thoughts about the date. Michael helped me trace the Google Voice number that evening. It took some technical work, but he discovered it had been created 3 days earlier and linked to an email address that used Sophie's college nickname. The evidence was circumstantial, but damning. She's trying to sabotage your vendors, Michael said, his voice tight with controlled fury. She's actively trying to destroy your wedding planning. I'm calling her right now. No, I said firmly, putting my hand over his phone. Don't. Heather, she crossed a line. This isn't passive-aggressive Facebook posts. This is deliberate interference. I know what it is, I interrupted, and I know exactly what she's trying to do. She wants me to react. She wants drama and confrontation and a reason to play the victim even harder. She's hoping I'll call her screaming and then she can tell everyone how cruel and unstable I am. Michael stared at me. So, what do you want to do? I thought about Eleanor's lakeside estate, about the elegant plans we'd been quietly making, about the wedding that was taking shape far beyond anything Sophie could imagine. And I smiled. I want to let her think she succeeded. Let her believe she's rattled me, that I'm scrambling to fix the damage she caused. Meanwhile, we just keep building something she can't touch. I called both vendors back, explained that someone had attempted fraud using my name, and confirmed all our original arrangements. Both were apologetic and understanding, and both mentioned they'd increase security around client information. I didn't name Sophie, but I didn't have to. That night, I drafted a response to Sophie's latest Facebook post. Michael read over my shoulder as I typed. Sophie, I'm sorry you're stressed about your wedding planning. Pregnancy must make everything feel more overwhelming. I want you to know that I won't interfere with your special day in any way. I hope August 15th is everything you're dreaming of. Best wishes to you and Brad. That's it, Michael asked. You're not going to call her out for the vendor sabotage? No, I said, because that's what she wants. She wants me to engage, to fight back, to look petty and jealous. I'm not playing that game anymore. I posted the comment publicly where all the relatives who'd been watching our drama could see it. Within minutes, responses appeared. "See, Sophie, your sister is being supportive." "This is so gracious, Heather." Beautiful response. Sophie didn't reply to my comment, but an hour later she posted another vague message. "Some people are really good at looking innocent in public. Just remember, God sees everything." I muted the thread and closed Facebook. Let her spiral into whatever narrative she needed. I had a wedding to plan, and it was going to be more beautiful than anything my family could imagine. Eleanor called that evening, having heard about the vendor sabotage through the professional network grapevine. "How are you holding up, dear?" "I'm okay," I said, and realised I meant it. Sophie's panicking because she knows she's losing control of the situation. This is her trying to regain power. "And you're not giving it to her," Eleanor said approvingly. "Good. Let her exhaust herself with her games while you focus on building something real." Over the next 2 weeks, I learned that Sophie had booked St. Catherine's Church for her ceremony. The detail made my chest ache, not because I'd wanted that church for my own wedding, though I had mentioned once in a family chat last year that I'd always loved its stained glass windows. It was the deliberateness of it that hurt. She'd chosen that church specifically to wound me, to take something I'd expressed affection for and claim it as hers. When Michael found out, he said quietly, "She's not just competing with you. She's trying to erase you." He was right. Every choice Sophie made seemed designed not just to elevate her own wedding, but to diminish mine. And the saddest part was that our parents either didn't see it or didn't care. But I had something Sophie didn't. People who celebrated me without requiring me to shrink. I had Eleanor's wisdom and generosity, Michael's unwavering support, Lily's uncomplicated love, and friends who saw my worth clearly. I texted Sophie one final time. "Don't worry, I won't interfere with your special day." But I had already accepted Eleanor's full sponsorship and was planning something she couldn't imagine. The first crack in Sophie's wedding plans appeared in early June, and I heard about it through the Seattle wedding vendor network before I heard it from my family. My florist, Dana, mentioned it casually during our final consultation. "I heard your sister is having trouble finding a photographer. Apparently, she went through 3 before finding someone willing to work with her." I looked up from the bouquet samples we'd been reviewing. 3. Dana hesitated, clearly debating how much to share. "The vendor community is pretty tight-knit in Seattle. Word gets around when someone is particularly difficult to work with. I probably shouldn't say more, but since you're family, I thought you should know she's getting a reputation." What I didn't know then was just how bad that reputation had become. Jennifer called me a few days later, barely able to contain her laughter. "Heather, you need to hear this. Brad's sister works at the catering company Sophie hired. Apparently, Sophie has changed the menu 5 times in 2 weeks. 5 times. And she still hasn't paid the deposit that was due 3 weeks ago. They're threatening to cancel her contract." "Is Brad okay?" I asked, genuinely concerned for him despite everything. "He's mortified," Jennifer said. "His family is very traditional and proper. Having his fiancée treated like a problem client is embarrassing for him. His sister said he had to intervene and pay the deposit himself just to keep the caterer from walking away." The pattern continued throughout June. I didn't seek out information about Sophie's planning disasters, but Seattle's wedding industry is surprisingly small, and news travelled. Her makeup artist quit after Sophie demanded a trial run at 7 a.m. on a Sunday, then criticised her work so harshly the woman left in tears. The dress alteration specialist refused to do a 4th round of changes, stating that the dress had been altered so many times it was structurally compromised. Then I saw the screenshot that my friend Ashley sent me, a post from a private wedding vendor forum that someone had leaked. The thread was titled "Difficult Clients" or "How do you handle them?" And there, in the middle of dozens of responses, was a comment that made my stomach drop. currently dealing with a bride who called me screaming because her flowers are going to cost more than her sister's. I explained I don't have access to her sister's budget or floral choices. She accused me of being part of a conspiracy to make her wedding look cheaper. She's called me 6 times this week. I'm seriously considering refunding her deposit and walking away. Another vendor had replied, "Is this the St. Catherine's wedding in August? If so, good luck. I'm doing lighting for that event." And she just demanded I add 200 string lights with 3 weeks' notice. I told her the church's electrical system can't handle the additional load without risking a circuit failure. She screamed at me that her sister probably has 1,000 lights at her venue, and I needed to figure it out. I documented my warning in writing. If that electrical system fails on her wedding day, it won't be my fault. I stared at the screenshot for a long time. Sophie was so obsessed with competing with me that she was sabotaging her own wedding-making demands that were technically impossible or financially unreasonable, treating professionals like enemies in some imaginary war. The saddest part was that I hadn't done anything to provoke this comparison. She'd invented a competition in her head, decided she was losing, and was now lashing out at everyone around her. But the worst was yet to come. In late June, I started receiving phone calls from elderly relatives I barely spoke to. My great-aunt Marlene called first, her voice dripping with concern. "Heather, dear, I wanted to ask you about this young man you're marrying. Sophie mentioned he has quite a complicated past." My spine stiffened. "What do you mean?" "Well, she didn't give details, but she suggested there were some red flags, that he's been married before and it ended badly, that there were issues. She's just concerned about you, dear. We all are." I managed to end the call politely, but my hands were shaking. Michael's divorce was something he'd been completely open about with me. His ex-wife had fallen in love with someone else and had been honest enough to admit it before things became destructive. They'd separated amicably, co-parented Lily successfully, and both had moved on. There was no scandal, no red flags, nothing but 2 people who'd married young and grown apart. That evening, I checked Sophie's Facebook page, something I'd avoided for weeks. There, posted 2 days earlier, was a message that made my blood boil. "Praying for my sister's happiness, even though our family has concerns about her choice. Sometimes love makes us overlook red flags, hoping everything works out for the best. It's hard to speak truth when you know it won't be received well. The hashtags family matters, sister, love, difficult conversations, praying for her." The comments were exactly what she'd intended, relatives expressing concern, asking what the red flags were, offering to talk to me. Sophie had responded to several with variations of, "I can't say more publicly, but those who know. I'm just worried for her." She was deliberately creating a whisper campaign against Michael, implying there was some dark secret in his past, painting him as damaged or dangerous without saying anything specific enough to be challenged. Michael found me crying at his kitchen table, the Facebook post still glowing on my phone screen. He read it silently, his jaw tightening. "This is about my divorce," he said quietly. "She's found out that Claire left me, and she's trying to make it sound sinister." "It's not fair," I choked out. "You've been nothing but honest about your past. You're one of the best men I've ever known. And she's trying to make people think you're some kind of—" "Hey," he interrupted, gently taking my hands. "People who matter know who I am. Your elderly aunt, who hasn't seen you in 5 years, doesn't get to define my character. And anyone who knows me professionally or personally will see right through this." He was right, but it still hurt. Sophie wasn't just attacking me anymore, she was going after the man I loved, trying to poison my happiness at its source. The next day, Eleanor called. "I heard about Sophie's Facebook post," she said without preamble. "Patricia Chen is furious. She's already contacted several people to set the record straight about Michael's character." "I don't want this to become a public fight," I said tiredly. "It won't be," Eleanor assured me. "But I've taken the liberty of inviting a few business associates to your wedding. people who've worked with Michael professionally, who can speak to his integrity and character. When they're at your celebration talking about their respect for him, it will counter Sophie's whispers more effectively than any confrontation could. I felt tears prick my eyes again, but this time from gratitude. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to, Eleanor said warmly. I want to. Besides, these are people who'd be delighted to attend. Michael has an excellent reputation in the Seattle business community. Let's make sure that's the narrative people remember. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophie at 11:47 p.m. You'll regret not listening to me. I'm trying to protect you, but you're too stubborn to see it. Don't say I didn't warn you when everything falls apart. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. I'd said everything I needed to say. Now I was simply building something beautiful, while Sophie exhausted herself fighting shadows. What I didn't know was that 3 weeks before the wedding, something would happen that Sophie never saw coming. 3 weeks before the wedding, on a sunny Saturday morning in late July, my event coordinator scheduled a full setup trial at Eleanor's estate. We needed to test the timing, lighting, and flow of the space to ensure everything would be perfect on August 15th. I drove out to the property with Michael and Lily, the 3 of us giddy with excitement to see our vision coming together. The transformation was breathtaking. The decorator had brought samples of everything: the white chairs arranged in perfect rows facing the lake, the floral arch positioned to catch the afternoon light, the elegant table settings that would grace the reception pavilion. It looked like something from a high-end wedding magazine, and I felt a moment of disbelief that this was actually my wedding. What I didn't notice was that my decorator Amanda was documenting the setup process on her Instagram stories. It was something she did for all her projects, behind-the-scenes content that showcased her work and attracted new clients. I'd signed a release months ago, allowing her to share photos, not thinking much about it at the time. The image she posted was artfully composed, a wide shot of the estate's lawn, with the lake shimmering in the background, the floral arch just visible, and the elegant pavilion in the distance. The caption read, "Sneak peek at this weekend's trial run. Cannot wait to show you the final result. This venue is a dream." I didn't see the post until Jennifer called me that evening. "Heather, Amanda's Instagram story is gorgeous. That's Eleanor's estate, isn't it? It looks incredible." "We did the full setup trial today," I confirmed. "Everything came together even better than I imagined." "You might want to check the comments on her post," Jennifer said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "People are very interested in whose wedding this is." I pulled up Amanda's Instagram and found the story had been viewed over 3,000 times. The comments were filled with heart eye emojis and questions. "Who's the lucky couple? This venue is goals. I need to know where this is." 2 weeks before the wedding, I got a notification that I'd been tagged in a post. A local wedding influencer named Sarah Chen, who had 15,000 followers and covered Seattle area weddings, had reposted Amanda's image with her own commentary. "This is going to be stunning. I've been told this is happening August 15th. Mark my calendar because I need to see the final photos." That lakeside pavilion, that floral arch, chef's kiss. The post exploded. Within hours, it had been shared dozens of times, commented on by other local wedding vendors, and sparked speculation about which lucky couple had secured such an extraordinary venue. Several people who followed both Sarah and Amanda started connecting dots. Amanda's other posts featured my company's projects, and Sarah had covered weddings for people in Seattle's design and tech communities. 1 week before the wedding, the speculation reached our extended family. Someone had shared Sarah's post into a Seattle wedding planning Facebook group, and from there it migrated into general Seattle community groups. My cousin's wife saw it and commented, "Wait, isn't Heather Simmons getting married on August 15th? Is this her venue?" The comments section erupted. Family, friends, distant relatives, and acquaintances who'd received our save the dates started putting pieces together. "That can't be Heather's wedding. Isn't she having something small? I heard her parents weren't even attending because of some family drama." Well, If this is her venue, it's certainly not small. Jennifer screenshot the entire comment thread and sent it to me with the single word, wow. I scrolled through the comments watching in real time as people discovered that the stunning lakeside wedding everyone had been talking about was mine. Some expressed shock. Others noted they'd always known I had excellent taste. A few pointed out the irony that the daughter whose parents weren't attending had apparently planned something more elegant than most people's dream weddings. 3 days before the wedding, the inevitable happened. Someone tagged my parents in a Facebook comment. Jim and Carol, you must be so excited for Heather's wedding at this amazing venue. What a beautiful place she's chosen. You must be so proud. My phone rang within 20 minutes. I was at work reviewing final invoices for a client project when my mother's name appeared on my screen. I let it ring through to voicemail. She called again and again. Finally, I answered. Hi, Mum. Heather, what is this venue people are talking about? Everyone's sending us photos of some estate on the lake. Is that really where you're getting married? Yes, I said simply. But how? When did you book this? That place must cost a fortune. You said you lost the money we'd given you. How could you possibly afford? I found another way, I interrupted calmly. Everything's taken care of. You should have told us, she said, and I could hear the confusion and something that might have been hurt in her voice. People keep asking us about it, and we don't know what to say. We look foolish not knowing details about our own daughter's wedding. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. They'd chosen not to attend my wedding, had dismissed it as unimportant compared to Sophie's, had withdrawn their financial support as punishment for not bending to Sophie's demands. And now, they were upset because they didn't have information to share with relatives who were impressed by what I'd planned. You'll see everything on the day, I said. If you want to come, you're welcome to attend, but I won't be providing advanced details or justifying my choices. I need to go now, Mum. I have work to finish. Heather, wait. I ended the call gently but firmly. My hands weren't shaking this time. I felt calm, centered, certain of my choices in a way I'd never quite managed before. That evening, my father texted, Your mother is very upset. She says you're being secretive and excluding us. We're still your parents, Heather. We deserve to know what's happening. I stared at the text for a long moment before typing back, You chose not to be part of this wedding. The details don't concern you anymore. I'll send photos afterward. Michael read my response over my shoulder and kissed the top of my head. How do you feel? Free? I said, and meant it. My parents called 3 more times over the next 2 days, asking questions I didn't answer. Sophie called, once her voice tight with barely controlled panic, demanding to know how I'd afforded that ridiculous venue and insisting I was trying to show her up. I let all the calls go to voicemail. The night before the wedding, I silenced my phone completely. Tomorrow was my day, and I refused to let their chaos touch it. And then, August 15th arrived. I woke up on August 15th to sunlight streaming through the windows of Eleanor's guest suite and the sound of birdsong from the gardens below. For a moment, I simply lay there letting the reality settle over me. This was my wedding day. Michael had stayed at his own place the night before Lily had insisted we follow the tradition of not seeing each other until the ceremony, so the estate felt peacefully quiet. Eleanor had arranged for my hairstylist and makeup artist to come to the house at 8, giving me plenty of time for a leisurely breakfast and a moment to simply breathe. I had no idea that across town at St. Catherine's Church, chaos had already begun. What I learned later, pieced together from Jennifer's texts and the stories that would eventually make their way back to me, was this. At 6 that morning, the church's electrician had arrived for a final check of the lighting system Sophie had demanded. 200 additional LED string lights installed just yesterday over the coordinator's protests had been woven through every pew, draped across the altar and wrapped around the columns. When the electrician flipped the main switch, the entire system overloaded. Circuit breakers tripped, plunging the sanctuary into darkness. He tried resetting the breakers. They tripped again immediately. The church's electrical system, original to the 1950s building, simply couldn't handle the load. And because the sanctuary's air conditioning ran on the same circuit, the backup generator could only power one or the other lights or cooling, but not both. By 8:30, after 2 hours of failed repairs and increasingly frantic phone calls, the wedding coordinator had to deliver devastating news to Sophie, who was already in full hair and makeup at the church's bridal suite. The ceremony would have to be delayed from 11 a.m. to at least 3 p.m, maybe later, before they rented and installed a proper generator. Sophie's breakdown was apparently spectacular. Screaming, crying mascara, running accusations flying at everyone from the coordinator to the electrician to Brad himself for not checking the church's electrical capacity. The coordinator, a patient woman named Margaret, who'd worked hundreds of weddings, reportedly said very calmly, "I warned you about this exact issue last Tuesday. You told me to make it work anyway. This is the consequence of ignoring professional advice." But I knew none of this as I sipped my coffee on Eleanor's terrace, watching sailboats glide across Lake Washington. At 10:30, while I was having my hair styled into soft waves with small white flowers tucked throughout, the first guests began arriving at St. Catherine's. They found folding chairs hastily set up on the lawn outside the church, the building itself still dark and stifling from the broken air conditioning. August in Seattle isn't brutally hot, but that day had dawned warm and humid, and the sun beat down on the makeshift outdoor setup with no shade in sight. Elderly relatives dressed in their formal attire fanned themselves with programs and complained about the heat. Brad's parents, already skeptical about the rushed wedding, looked increasingly furious as they realized the ceremony was delayed indefinitely. The coordinator made announcements every 30 minutes. "We're working on the problem. Ceremony should begin by 3 p.m. We apologize for the inconvenience." By 11, the time the ceremony was originally scheduled to start, a quiet exodus had begun. Several guests, particularly those who'd been friendly with me over the years, made a decision. Since Sophie's ceremony wouldn't start for at least 4 more hours, they'd stop by Heather's venue to see what all the social media fuss was about. They could make it back in time for Sophie's 3 p.m. ceremony, assuming it actually happened. One of those guests was my cousin Jennifer, who texted me at 11:15. "Heather, I'm coming to your venue. Sophie's wedding is a disaster, electrical failure, everything delayed until at least 3 p.m. Half the guests are sitting outside in the heat. I'll tell you everything later, but I couldn't miss seeing you on your actual wedding day. See you soon." I read her text with a mixture of sadness and something uncomfortably close to vindication. I'd never wanted Sophie's wedding to fail, but I couldn't ignore the poetry of it. She'd created this disaster herself by ignoring every professional warning, by demanding the impossible, by being so obsessed with outdoing me that she'd sabotaged her own event. Eleanor found me on the terrace at noon, looking beautiful in an elegant champagne-coloured dress. "How are you feeling, dear?" "Happy," I said honestly, genuinely happy. "Is that terrible? Sophie's wedding is apparently falling apart, and I'm just relieved it's not my problem to fix." "That's not terrible," Eleanor said gently. "That's growth. You've spent your whole life trying to fix Sophie's problems and absorb her chaos. Today, you're choosing to focus on your own joy instead. That's healthy." At 12:30, my parents made their decision. I didn't know about it yet, but Jennifer texted me later with the details. Mum and Dad had been sitting outside St. Catherine's for over an hour watching the disaster unfold. When Sophie's coordinator announced another delay, the generator rental company was backed up and couldn't arrive until at least 2 p.m. My father stood up and said to my mother, "This is ridiculous. Let's go see what's happening at Heather's wedding. We can be back by 3. Sophie, who'd been pacing in the bridal suite and checking her phone obsessively, saw them leaving through the window. She ran outside in her wedding dress, mascara stained and desperate. "Where are you going? You can't leave. I need you here." My father, apparently uncomfortable, but determined, said, "The ceremony isn't for hours, Sophie. We'll be back. We just want to see your sister for a few minutes." "You're choosing her again," Sophie screamed loud enough that guests turned to stare. "You're leaving me on my wedding day." But they went anyway. They got in their car and drove toward the address that had been listed on my save the date card, the one they'd barely glanced at months ago when they'd decided my wedding didn't matter. Just as Sophie's world was falling apart, mine was about to begin. And my parents were about to make a decision that would haunt them. What I didn't know as I stood in Eleanor's guest suite, admiring my reflection in the simple silk wedding dress that made me feel beautiful without trying too hard, was that the tipping point had just arrived at St. Catherine's Church. Jennifer told me later that it started with my cousin Rachel, who'd been sitting in the sweltering sun for over 90 minutes, fanning herself with a program and checking her phone to pass the time. She'd been scrolling through Facebook when she noticed something odd. Multiple people were checking in at a location called Whitmore Estate. All of them posting photos of an elegant lakeside venue with captions like, "Most beautiful ceremony venue ever," and "So excited for this celebration." Rachel clicked on one of the check-ins and found herself looking at professional photos of the estate, the sweeping lawn, the lake view, the elegant pavilion. Then she noticed the hashtag Heather and Michael. "Oh my God," she said loudly enough that the people sitting near her looked up. "Heather's wedding is at that place." The exclamation rippled through the crowd of hot, frustrated guests like electricity through water. Within seconds, dozens of people were pulling out their phones, searching for Whitmore Estate, finding the Instagram posts and Facebook check-ins that had been accumulating all morning as my early guests arrived. "That's a $50,000 venue," someone murmured loud enough to be heard by those nearby. How did Heather afford that? I thought her parents weren't even helping with her wedding. "Look at those flowers. That's not a budget ceremony." The murmur of conversation grew louder. People were showing each other photos comparing the elegant lakeside setting to their current reality of folding chairs on hot pavement. The contrast was impossible to ignore, while Sophie's carefully planned church ceremony had devolved into chaos. My wedding was apparently proceeding exactly as planned in a setting that looked like something from a luxury magazine. Margaret, Sophie's coordinator, emerged from the church to make another announcement. "We've located a generator company that can be here by 2 p.m. We're now looking at a 3:30 ceremony start time. Again, we apologise for the delay." 3:30. That was 4.5 hours after the ceremony was supposed to begin. Several guests exchanged glances. A group of 4 family friends who'd known both Sophie and me since childhood stood up and approached Margaret. "We're going to step out for a bit," one of them said diplomatically. "We'll be back for the 3:30 ceremony." "Where are you going?" Margaret asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "Just to check on Heather, since there's so much time before this ceremony starts." They weren't the only ones. Over the next 15 minutes, a steady trickle of guests made similar excuses and headed to their cars. Most claimed they'd be back for Sophie's delayed ceremony, but the coordinator's face suggested she'd heard those promises before and knew better. Inside the church's bridal suite, Sophie watched through the window as car after car pulled out of the parking lot. She was still in her wedding dress, her professionally styled hair beginning to wilt in the heat, her makeup requiring constant touch-ups because she couldn't stop crying. "They're leaving," she said to her maid of honour, her voice climbing toward hysteria. "Everyone's leaving to go to Heather's wedding. They said they'll be back," her friend tried to reassure her. "They won't," Sophie said with sudden, terrible clarity. "Why would they come back here to this disaster when they can be at her perfect, beautiful venue?" She pulled out her phone and called our parents. My father answered, his voice tight with stress. "Where are you?" Sophie demanded. There was a pause. "We're in the car, sweetheart. We're just going to check on your sister for a few minutes. We'll be back well before 3:30. "You're leaving me," Sophie's voice cracked. "On my wedding day, you're actually leaving me to go to her wedding." "Sophie, calm down. The ceremony isn't for hours. We'll be back in plenty of time." "I can't believe this," Sophie sobbed. "You chose her again. You always choose her." The irony of that statement, Sophie, who'd been chosen and prioritized every day of her life, now claiming she was the overlooked one, would have been funny if it weren't so sad. But my father didn't argue with her. He simply said, "We'll see you soon," and ended the call. Sophie stood in the church parking lot, still in her wedding dress mascara running despite her makeup artist's best efforts, watching more cars leave. Brad found her there and tried to guide her back inside, but she shook him off. "This is Heather's fault," she said, her voice venomous. "She planned this. She knew my wedding would have problems, and she scheduled hers at the same time to humiliate me." "Sophie, that's not—" Brad started, but she wasn't listening. She's been planning this all along. The expensive venue, the social media posts, everything. She wanted to make me look bad. Brad's expression shifted to something between pity and frustration. "Sophie, Heather didn't cause the electrical problem. That happened because you demanded lights the building couldn't handle. The coordinator warned you. Remember." Sophie's face flushed with anger and shame. She turned away from him, unable to face the truth in his words. At that moment, my parents' car was pulling onto the long driveway that led to Whitmore Estate. They'd told themselves they were just checking in on me, that they'd stay 15 minutes and then return to Sophie's ceremony. What they didn't say aloud, but both were thinking, was that they needed to verify what they'd seen on social media, needed to confirm that I hadn't somehow embarrassed the family by claiming to have a venue I couldn't actually afford. They were about to discover exactly how wrong their assumptions had been. Sophie stood in the church parking lot, mascara running, watching cars leave. She called over our parents, begging them to stay, but they had already started driving to Whitmore Estate. I was in Eleanor's private sitting room at 1 p.m, taking deep breaths and watching the clock count down to the ceremony when my parents' car turned onto the estate's oak-lined driveway. I didn't know they were coming. I'd silenced my phone and handed it to Eleanor that morning with instructions not to return it until after the reception. This day was mine, and I refused to let family chaos intrude. But they were coming anyway, and what they encountered would shift everything. The driveway curved through ancient oak trees, their branches creating a canopy of dappled sunlight. My father drove slowly, both of them staring at the approach to the estate. Luxury cars lined the circular drive, Mercedes, BMWs, a Tesla. Even a vintage Rolls-Royce that belonged to one of Eleanor's business associates. A professional valet service was directing traffic, young men in crisp white shirts and black vests, guiding guests to parking areas. My father pulled up to the valet stand, and a young man approached with a warm smile. "Good afternoon. Welcome to the Chen Simmons wedding. May I see your invitation?" My parents exchanged glances. "We don't have an invitation," my mother said, her voice uncertain. "We're the bride's parents." The valet's smile didn't waver, but he gestured to a security checkpoint near the entrance. "Of course. Please check in with Marcos at the gate. He'll get you sorted." Security. My parents hadn't expected security at their daughter's wedding. They walked toward the checkpoint where a professional-looking man in a suit checked a tablet. "Names, please. Jim and Carol Simmons," my father said. "Heather's parents." Marcos scrolled through his list, his expression neutral. "I don't see you on the VIP list, but let me check the general guest list." Another pause. "I'm not finding you registered. When did you RSVP?" "We didn't," my mother admitted. "We weren't planning to attend, but we thought we'd stop by." Marcus's expression flickered with something that might have been recognition or pity. "One moment, please. Let me contact the coordinator." He stepped away, speaking quietly into a radio. While they waited, my parents looked around, really seeing the estate for the first time. The manicured gardens, the lake shimmering in the distance, the elegant pathway leading toward the ceremony area, where they could hear the soft strains of a string quartet. This wasn't a small family wedding. This was something extraordinary. Marcos returned. "The coordinator has approved your entry. Please follow the path to the lakeside ceremony area. The ceremony begins at 2 p.m. They walked the stone pathway, passing between gardens where white roses and blue hydrangeas bloomed in careful arrangements. As they crested a small hill, the ceremony site came into full view, and my mother actually gasped. White chairs were arranged in perfect rows on the manicured lawn, each row tied with white ribbon and a small cluster of flowers. The ceremony arch stood at the focal point, an elegant structure covered in white roses and blue hydrangeas, my favourite flowers, though my parents had never known that. Beyond the arch, Lake Washington stretched out like glass sailboats, gliding across the surface. A string quartet sat in the shade of a large oak tree, playing something classical and beautiful. The pavilion, where the reception would be held, was visible in the distance, draped in elegant fabric and fairy lights that would glow as the sun set. But it was the guests that really made my parents pause. They recognised some faces, a few relatives, Jennifer and her husband, some family friends. But there were dozens of people they'd never seen before, well-dressed professionals, executives in tailored suits, women in elegant dresses and sophisticated jewellery. They saw my boss from the design firm talking animatedly with a woman my mother vaguely recognised as a local architect. They saw Michael's mother, Patricia, holding Lily's hand, both of them dressed beautifully, laughing at something one of Michael's colleagues had said. This wasn't the modest, non-traditional wedding my mother had dismissed. This was a celebration attended by people who clearly respected and valued me, people who'd made time in their schedules to witness this day. "Carol," my father said quietly, "we're underdressed." It was true. My mother wore a casual summer dress and cardigan, appropriate for an outdoor church wedding, but decidedly informal compared to the cocktail attire and formal wear surrounding them. My father's khakis and button-down shirt looked equally out of place. They'd dressed for Sophie's traditional church ceremony, not for this elegant lakeside affair. They found seats near the back, trying to be inconspicuous. But people noticed them. A colleague of mine from work did a visible double take, then leaned to whisper something to her husband. Jennifer caught sight of them, and her eyebrows shot up in surprise. She made her way over her expression carefully neutral. "Uncle Jim." "Aunt Carol," she said quietly. "I didn't expect to see you here." "We just wanted to stop by for a few minutes," my mother said, defensive. "We'll be going back to Sophie's ceremony soon." Jennifer's expression shifted to something that looked like disappointment. "Of course you will." She walked away before they could respond. Another guest, an older woman who'd known our family for years, approached. "Jim, Carol." "Oh, you decided to come after all. I'm so glad. When I heard you were attending Sophie's wedding instead, I thought surely there must be some misunderstanding. No parent would miss their daughter's wedding day." The comment landed like an accusation. My father mumbled something non-committal, and the woman moved on, but her words hung in the air. The implication was crystal clear. People knew. People knew they'd chosen Sophie's wedding over mine, and they judged that choice. My mother's eyes swept the elegant setup, the distinguished guests, undeniable care and expense that had gone into every detail. "How did she afford all this?" she whispered to my father. "We didn't give her any money. She couldn't possibly buy." Before they could process what they were seeing, Michael appeared and his expression was ice cold. Michael's approach was perfectly composed, his posture straight, and his expression professionally neutral, but I learned later that everyone who knew him could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. His jaw was tight, his movements precise, and his eyes held none of the warmth he usually showed to guests. Jim, Carol. He didn't call them by their parental titles, didn't embrace them or shake hands. Just acknowledged their presence with their first names the way he might address strangers. "I wasn't aware you were planning to attend." My mother's smile was uncertain, apologetic. "We thought we'd stop by for a few minutes. Sophie's ceremony is delayed, so we have some time." Michael's expression didn't change. "I see. You're here because your other daughter's wedding is experiencing difficulties." He let that hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "I'll check if Heather wants to see you. Please wait here." Not "she'll be so thrilled you came," not "what a wonderful surprise," not any of the warm welcome a groom might typically offer his bride's parents. Just a cold, neutral acknowledgement that they were technically allowed to remain but were not particularly welcomed. "Michael, we didn't mean," my father started. "Please, wait here." Michael repeated his tone, allowing no argument. Then he turned and walked toward the estate's main house without looking back. My parents stood awkwardly near the back row of chairs, unsure whether to sit or stand, acutely aware that they were out of place. Guests continued to arrive and find their seats, the low hum of pleasant conversation filling the air. My parents found themselves inadvertently eavesdropping on the people seated in front of them. "I'm so excited to finally meet Heather's family," a woman in an elegant navy dress was saying to her companion. "After everything she did for our design project last year, I feel like I owe her so much. Do you remember? We were 3 weeks from a complete disaster, and she came in and restructured the entire timeline, worked nights and weekends, and delivered something even better than we'd originally envisioned." "That's Heather," her companion replied. "No ego, just pure excellence. And so kind about it too. She could have thrown the previous designer under the bus, but she just quietly fixed everything and made sure everyone looked good." "The most genuine person I've ever worked with," the first woman agreed. "When I heard about this venue, I wasn't surprised. She deserves every bit of this beautiful day." My mother's face flushed. These strangers were speaking about her daughter, with more knowledge and affection than she'd shown in years. They knew about Heather's work accomplishments, her character, her kindness. They knew her in ways my mother had never bothered to learn. Before my parents could fully absorb this, an elegant older woman approached them. She was striking tall, silver-haired, wearing a champagne-coloured dress that spoke of quiet wealth and impeccable taste. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. "You must be Heather's parents," she said, extending her hand with a smile that was warm but somehow didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Eleanor Whitmore. Heather designed my home last year. She's become like a daughter to me." The emphasis on "like a daughter" while speaking directly to Heather's actual parents was impossible to miss. My mother shook her hand weakly, clearly intimidated. "This is your property?" my father asked, looking around with new understandanding. "It is," Eleanor confirmed. "When I learned about Heather's wedding plans, I insisted she use this venue. She deserves to be celebrated properly." Another subtle dig, the implication that her actual family hadn't been planning to celebrate her properly at all. "It's beautiful," my mother managed. "We had no idea. You must be so proud of this beautiful day," Eleanor interrupted, her tone still pleasant but her eyes sharp. "All of Heather's planning has come together so wonderfully." My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We weren't really involved in the planning," my father admitted. "Oh!" Eleanor's eyebrows lifted in perfectly performed surprise. "I thought surely you'd been part of it. Heather speaks so highly of family. I assumed you'd been integral to the preparations." The lie was so smoothly delivered that it took a moment to register. Eleanor knew exactly what had happened, knew they'd abandoned their daughter's wedding planning, and was making them acknowledge it publicly. "We've been helping Sophie with her wedding," my mother said defensively. "Same day, you know, it was complicated." "I see," Eleanor said, and those 2 words contained volumes of judgment. "How unfortunate that you had to make such a difficult choice. Though I notice a number of guests here seem to have managed to make this their priority." She gestured to the well-dressed crowd, making it clear that many people had chosen Heather when her own parents hadn't. "We were told we weren't needed here," my mother said, her voice rising slightly. "Heather seemed to have everything handled. Needed and wanted are different things," Eleanor said quietly, and the gentleness in her voice made the words cut deeper. "A daughter always wants her parents at her wedding, even if she's capable of managing without them. But I'm glad Heather had people who stepped up to celebrate her. She's an extraordinary young woman." You raised her well, even if you don't seem to fully appreciate what you created. The conversation was interrupted by Patricia Chen Michael's mother joining them. She'd clearly been watching from a distance and had decided to add her own weight to the moment. "Jim Carroll," she said with cool politeness. "I'm surprised to see you here. Michael mentioned you wouldn't be attending." "We changed our minds," my father said stiffly. "How fortunate," Patricia said in a tone that suggested she thought it was anything but. "Michael has been so protective of Heather through all of this. He's a good man. I hope you'll have the chance to really get to know him today, see the kind of partner your daughter has chosen." The implication stung that they didn't know Michael hadn't bothered to get to know him because they'd dismissed him as a divorced man with baggage, the way my mother had so callously phrased it months ago. My father shifted his weight uncomfortably. "We should probably get back to Sophie's ceremony soon. We just wanted to see..." Just then, the string quartet shifted to a new melody. The ceremony was about to begin. The opening notes of Pachelbel's Canon in D floated across the lawn, and I felt Eleanor squeeze my hand one final time before releasing me. "Are you ready, dear?" I nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging my throat. Through the window of the estate's conservatory, where I'd been waiting, I could see the guests stand and turn toward the pathway. I could see Michael at the altar, handsome in his charcoal suit, his hands clasped in front of him. Even from this distance, I could see the love and anticipation on his face. "Remember," Eleanor whispered, "this day is yours, every moment of it. Don't let anything steal your joy." I had no idea why she was emphasizing that particular point, didn't know that my parents were sitting in the back row watching. All I knew was that I was about to marry the man I loved, surrounded by people who valued me exactly as I was. Lily went first, 8 years old, and taking her role as flower girl with utmost seriousness. She wore a simple white dress with a blue sash that matched the hydrangeas, her dark hair pulled back with a delicate flower crown. She walked slowly, carefully, dropping rose petals from her basket, her face scrunched in concentration. When she reached the front, she took her place beside Michael and gave him an enormous grin. Then it was my turn. I stepped onto the path alone, a choice I'd made deliberately. No father to give me away, like I was property to be transferred. No one walking beside me because I needed support to reach the altar. Just me choosing freely, walking toward my future on my own 2 feet. The dress was simple ivory silk that draped elegantly, without being fussy, cap sleeves and a modest neckline, that felt timeless rather than trendy. My hair fell in natural waves down my back, small white flowers woven throughout like Eleanor had worn at her own wedding 40 years ago. I carried a bouquet of white roses and blue hydrangeas, the flowers my mother had never known were my favourites. I walked slowly, not because of nerves, but because I wanted to remember this. The afternoon sun warm on my shoulders, the lake sparkling beyond the ceremony arch, the faces of people who loved me genuinely, who'd made time to celebrate this day, my boss from work dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, Jennifer beaming at me with pride, Patricia Chen Michael's mother nodding approval as if welcoming me officially into her family, and Michael. His eyes locked on mine, and I watched his expression crumble with emotion. This strong, steady man who'd supported me through every difficult moment of the past months was crying openly, not bothering to hide his tears. When I was halfway down the aisle, something beautiful and unexpected happened. Michael stepped down from the altar and began walking toward me. We met in the middle of the aisle, neither of us waiting for the other to make the full journey alone. He took my hands and we walked the rest of the way together. Lily, unable to contain herself any longer, stage whispered loud enough for the first several rows to hear, "You look like a princess, Mum. Heather, Mum. Heather. Not Heather. Not Dad's girlfriend. Mum, Heather." It was the first time she'd used that name, and I saw Michael's eyes widen with the same recognition I felt. This wasn't just a wedding. This was the official formation of a family that had been growing in our hearts for months. The ceremony itself was simple and honest. Our officiant, a friend of Eleanor's who was a retired judge, spoke about the courage it takes to love again after experiencing loss, about the beauty of families that choose each other, about building something new without erasing what came before. When we reached the vows, Michael's voice cracked with emotion. "Heather, you taught me that loving again doesn't mean forgetting pain, it means choosing hope anyway. You showed me that a heart can break and heal and be even stronger for it. You welcomed my daughter with such genuine love that she's become a better version of herself. I choose you every day for the rest of my life. Not because it's easy, but because you're worth every difficult moment it took to find you." I had to pause before I could speak, tears streaming freely down my face. "Michael, you showed me that family isn't who shares your blood, it's who sees your heart. You saw me when I'd gotten so used to being invisible that I'd almost disappeared. You made me believe I was worth taking up space, worth celebrating, worth loving exactly as I am. And Lily." I looked at the little girl watching us with shining eyes. "You taught me that love doesn't require biology. It just requires showing up honestly every single day." From somewhere in the back rows, I heard a sob. I assumed it was one of my more emotional friends, not knowing it was my mother finally understanding what she'd missed, what she'd chosen to miss. The judge smiled. "By the power vested in me by the state of Washington, I now pronounce you married. Michael, you may kiss your bride." Michael pulled me close, and the kiss was tender and joyful and full of promise. The guests erupted in applause. Lily was jumping up and down. The string quartet shifted to a triumphant recessional. We walked back down the aisle together, hands clasped, grinning like fools. I saw Eleanor dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. I saw colleagues cheering. I saw Jennifer giving me an enthusiastic thumbs up. What I didn't see, because they were in the very back, and I was too focused on Michael and our joy, were my parents. My mother was crying, but not with happiness, with the terrible recognition of what she'd thrown away. My father's face was pale with the understanding that they were watching the happiest moment of their daughter's life as complete outsiders. They'd chosen Sophie over and over again, and now they were seeing the cost of that choice in the face of a daughter who'd learned to flourish without them. They'd told themselves that Heather didn't need them, that she was fine on her own, that Sophie needed their support more. But watching her marry a man who clearly treasured her, surrounded by people who'd stepped in to fill the roles they'd abandoned, they finally understood Heather had always needed them. She'd just learned to build a life that didn't collapse when they weren't there to hold it up. Just as the judge pronounced us married and Michael and I began our walk back down the aisle, every phone in the crowd buzzed simultaneously with a notification. I didn't notice the phones. I was too wrapped up in the moment, Michael's hand in mine. The applause of our guests, the feeling of being married settling into my bones like sunlight. We walked back down the aisle together, grinning at each other like teenagers, Lily skipping ahead of us and waving to the crowd like a tiny celebrity. As we reached the end of the aisle and stepped into the garden pathway that would lead us to the reception area, I heard scattered gasps and saw several guests quickly putting their phones away. At the time, I assumed they'd been taking photos capturing the moment. I had no idea they'd just received a notification that would spread through Seattle's wedding community like wildfire. What I learned later, much later after the reception ended, and Michael finally told me what had happened, was this. At Sophie's wedding venue, things had gone from bad to catastrophic. The generator had finally arrived at 2:15, just as my ceremony was beginning. But Sophie, who'd been spiralling for hours in that overheated bridal suite, had reached her breaking point. When Margaret, her coordinator, came to tell her they could finally begin setting up for the delayed ceremony, Sophie had launched into a tirade that would become infamous. She'd thrown her bouquet at the coordinator, screamed that everyone had ruined her day, and sobbed hysterically that everyone left me for my sister. What made it worse, or perhaps what made it perfect karma, was that Dana the florist, Sophie had verbally abused weeks earlier, had witnessed the entire breakdown. She'd pulled out her phone and filmed 90 seconds of the meltdown, capturing Sophie in her wedding dress mascara, screaming at professionals who'd done nothing wrong except try to manage the crisis she'd created. Dana had posted it to a private Facebook group called Seattle Wedding Professionals Support Network with a caption that was both sympathetic and self-protective. This is why we need difficult client clauses in our contracts. We warned her about the electrical capacity. She ignored us. Now we're being blamed for her poor planning. Protect yourselves, fellow vendors. Document everything. The group had 3,000 members, every wedding vendor in the greater Seattle area. Within minutes, dozens of people had commented with their own horror stories about difficult clients. But someone had screenshot the video and posted it to Twitter. From there, it had jumped to TikTok, then Instagram Reels, spreading with the viral velocity that only truly shocking content achieves. The caption that accompanied most shares: Bridezilla has complete meltdown when wedding goes wrong, blames everyone except herself. By 2:15, the video had 10,000 views. By 2:30, it was approaching 100,000. Comments poured in, most of them unsympathetic. She's blaming vendors for problems she created. The entitlement is unreal. That poor coordinator looks like she wants to quit on the spot. At my wedding, during the cocktail hour while Michael and I were taking photos by the lake with our photographer, the video reached critical mass. I'd see phones being checked, discreetly, shocked expressions, whispered conversations. People were showing each other their screens, eyebrows raised, mouths forming silent, "Oh my God" expressions. Jennifer watched the video on her phone, her hand over her mouth. She immediately sought out Eleanor, who was greeting guests near the pavilion. "Eleanor, have you seen?" "I have..." Eleanor interrupted, quietly glancing toward where Michael and I stood by the water, completely absorbed in our photo session. "Michael's mother sent it to me 5 minutes ago. We're handling it." "Does Heather know?" "Absolutely not," Eleanor said firmly. "And she won't know until tomorrow at the earliest. This is her wedding day. Sophie's drama doesn't get to touch it." Eleanor moved through the crowd with purpose, speaking quietly to close friends and family. "If you've seen the video about Sophie, do not mention it to Heather. If she asks about her sister's wedding later, simply say you heard it was delayed, but you're sure it worked out fine. This day belongs to Heather, understood?" The message spread quickly through the guests. When my boss pulled out her phone to show a colleague, another co-worker gently pushed it back down. "Not here, not today. Heather doesn't need to know." Michael's business partner approached him during a break in photos. "Michael, there's something you should know about." Michael held up his hand. "If it's about Sophie, I don't want to hear it right now. Nothing ruins this day for Heather. Whatever it is, can wait." "But it's everywhere online. She's going to find out eventually." "Eventually isn't today," Michael said with finality. "Today, all that exists is this moment. Sophie's choices, Sophie's consequences, Sophie's problems. None of that has anything to do with us right now." His partner nodded with understanding and walked away. Eleanor had confiscated my phone that morning, as I'd requested, locking it in her office safe along with other valuables. "You'll get it back after the reception," she'd said. "Today, you're present with your people, not your device." It was one of the best decisions I'd made. While the internet exploded with Sophie's meltdown, while thousands of strangers watched my sister's worst moment and judged her choices, I remained blissfully unaware. I was laughing with Michael as our photographer captured candid moments. I was accepting congratulations from colleagues who'd taken time from their weekends to celebrate with us. I was watching Lily show off her flower girl dress to anyone who'd admire it. The cocktail hour was elegant and joyful. Servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The string quartet had transitioned to more upbeat classical pieces. Guests mingled on the lawn, enjoying the perfect August weather and the stunning views. My parents stood awkwardly near the bar, still processing everything that they'd witnessed. A few people approached them with polite greetings. "You must be so proud of Heather. What a beautiful ceremony. Your daughter has done so well for herself." Each comment a small reminder of what they'd almost missed entirely. Jennifer finally approached them, her expression carefully neutral. "You should know," she said quietly, "that something happened at Sophie's wedding. A video. It's spreading online. You might want to check on her." My father pulled out his phone, and his face went pale as he watched the 90-second clip of his younger daughter's public breakdown. My mother looked over his shoulder and her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, God," my mother whispered. "We need to get back there. Sophie needs us." But even as she said it, she glanced back toward where Michael and I were posing for photos, radiant with happiness, and I think she finally understood the choice she'd made. She could leave now and rush back to Sophie's crisis and miss the rest of my reception. Or she could be present for at least part of my celebration and deal with Sophie's problems later. She chose wrong, as she always had. "We need to go," she told my father. "Sophie needs us." Eleanor, watching from a distance, simply shook her head. Some people she'd learned over 68 years of life would always choose the crisis over the celebration, would always prioritise the child who was falling apart over the one who'd learned to stand strong. My parents slipped away during cocktail hour before I'd even noticed they'd been there. They wouldn't tell me they'd attended until days later, and by then, it wouldn't matter. The ceremony ended, and guests moved to the lakeside reception. But the most emotional moment was still to come. The reception pavilion looked like something from a dream. Eleanor's event team had transformed the lakeside structure with thousands of tiny lights that would glow brighter as the sun set. Round tables draped in ivory linen were arranged to face the water, each centerpiece a low arrangement of white roses and blue hydrangeas surrounding candlelight. The head table sat on a slight rise, giving Michael, Lily and me a view of both our guests and the lake beyond, where the setting sun was beginning to paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. This wasn't ostentatious or over the top. It was elegant and warm, the kind of celebration that felt both special and genuine. As guests found their seats and servers began bringing out the first course, I looked around at the faces gathered to celebrate, us colleagues who'd become friends. Eleanor and her business associates, Michael's family, Jennifer, and the relatives who'd chosen to be here. This was what chosen family looked like. Not the biggest gathering or the most expensive venue, but the people who'd actively decided we were worth celebrating. Dinner service was beautiful. The caterer Eleanor had recommended had created a menu that was both sophisticated and approachable. Seared salmon with lemon butter, herb-roasted chicken vegetarian risotto. That was so good, even the meat eaters were asking for seconds. Wine flowed freely. Conversation buzzed warmly, and laughter echoed across the water. I was halfway through my salmon, leaning into Michael's shoulder, and feeling perfectly content, when Lily tapped on her water glass with a fork. The clear, ringing sound drew attention, and the conversations around us began to quiet. Excuse me," Lily said, her 8-year-old voice carrying across the pavilion with surprising confidence. "I wrote a speech. Dad said I could read it if I wanted to, so I want to." I looked at Michael in surprise. He squeezed my hand and whispered, "I had no idea what she wrote. She wouldn't let me see it. Said it was private until the wedding." Lily stood up from her seat, smoothing down her dress, and pulled out a piece of paper that had clearly been folded and unfolded many times. Her handwriting was careful, the letters slightly uneven, in the way of children who are trying very hard to be neat. She cleared her throat and began to read. "Mom, Heather taught me that family isn't people who have to love you because you're related. Family is people who choose to love you even when it's hard." The pavilion had gone completely silent. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. Lily continued, her young voice, serious and thoughtful. "When my mum and dad got divorced, I thought I broke our family. I cried a lot and thought it was my fault. But Heather told me something really important. She said I didn't break anything. Some things just change shape, like how water can be liquid or ice or steam, but it's still water. Our family changed shape, but it didn't break." I could see people around the room pulling out tissues. Eleanor's eyes were shining with unshed tears. Michael had his hand pressed to his mouth, clearly fighting to maintain composure. And now, our family has a new shape, and it's really good, Lily said, looking directly at me with those earnest 8-year-old eyes. Heather helps me with homework and doesn't get mad when I don't understand math. She laughs at Dad's bad jokes so he doesn't feel embarrassed. She makes really good cookies, and she always remembers that I don't like green peppers. And most important, she makes me feel like I'm not a problem or a complication. She makes me feel like I'm wanted. My vision blurred with tears. Michael handed me his napkin, but I could see he needed it himself. So, I just want to say thank you to Heather for choosing our family, Lily finished. And welcome to being married to my dad. He snores sometimes, but he's mostly pretty great. The last line got a ripple of laughter through the tears. Also, I'm really glad I get to call you Mum Heather now, instead of just Heather, because you've been my mum in my heart for a long time. She sat down quickly, her cheeks flushed, and I immediately reached across Michael to pull her into a hug. I was crying openly now, not caring about my makeup or what anyone thought. This child who I'd worried about being good enough for had just articulated something I'd been feeling my whole life, that being chosen, being wanted, being seen was more valuable than any biological connection. When I finally released Lily and wiped my eyes, Michael stood up, his own voice thick with emotion. He raised his glass and the room quieted again. I wasn't planning to make a toast right after that, he said with a watery laugh. Lily kind of stole my thunder. But there's something I need to say, something I want everyone here to understand about the woman I just married. He looked down at me, and the love in his eyes was so profound it felt like a physical force. Heather spent her life being told she was the easy child who didn't need attention, the responsible one, the independent one, the one who always had everything figured out. And because she fulfilled that role so well, people stopped checking if she was okay. They stopped asking what she needed. They assumed that not asking for help meant not needing it. The reception was absolutely silent now. I could feel people listening, really listening. But the truth is, Michael continued, she deserved it all along. She deserved to be seen celebrated and loved exactly as she is. Not as the supporting character in someone else's story, but as the protagonist of her own life. And that's what today is about. Today, we give her what she always deserved, to be the centre of attention, to have her joy prioritised, to be celebrated as loudly and proudly as any person should be on their wedding day. He raised his glass higher. To Heather. To the woman who taught me that strength isn't about never needing anyone. It's about building a life where people want to show up for you because you've shown up for them. To my wife, who is extraordinary, not despite being overlooked, but because she learned to see her own worth when others couldn't. To Heather. The room echoed glasses raised. I stood and kissed Michael, not caring that we were in front of everyone tasting salt from both our tears. When we broke apart, the applause was thunderous. Eleanor approached our table, dabbing at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. That child is remarkable, she said, gesturing to Lily. And so are you, dear. This is exactly the celebration you deserved. The reception continued in that vein, warm, emotional, filled with genuine joy, rather than performative celebration. The sun set over the lake, and the string lights came alive, casting everything in a soft glow. The DJ began playing music for dancing. I danced with Michael, with Lily, with Eleanor, with colleagues and friends who'd become family. For those hours, I was completely present in my happiness, unaware of anything happening beyond the boundaries of Eleanor's estate. The reception continued in joy until 5:30 p.m, when Sophie's video call shattered the peace. I was dancing with Eleanor when the phone rang, the two of us swaying to an old jazz standard, while she told me stories about her late husband. The shrill ring of a FaceTime call cut through the music, loud enough that several nearby tables turned to look for the source. I didn't recognize the ringtone. It wasn't mine, but I saw Jennifer's face go pale as she looked toward a table near the edge of the pavilion. Following her gaze, I saw my parents' empty seats and realized with a jolt that I hadn't noticed they'd left. When had they been here? How long had they stayed? But there was no time to process that question, because my mother was rushing back to her table from wherever she had been fumbling with her phone, her face stricken with panic. She was trying to silence it or decline the call, but her hands were shaking, and instead she accidentally accepted it, and somehow activated the speaker. Sophie's face filled the screen, and her voice, raw, hysterical, amplified by the speaker, carried across the pavilion. "Why did you leave me? You said you'd be back by 3:30. Everyone left. The ceremony finally started at 4, and there were only 30 people there. Where are you?" The music didn't stop. Immediately, the DJ was on the other side of the pavilion and hadn't yet registered the disturbance, but conversation ceased. Guests turned uncomfortable, trying to look away from the private family drama unfolding publicly. My mother was desperately trying to lower the volume, but Sophie's screaming continued. "You were supposed to be here. This is my wedding day, and you abandoned me. Heather ruined everything. She stole my guests. She stole my day. You chose her over me." Through the phone speaker, I could hear Brad's voice in the background, tired and embarrassed. "Sophie, stop calling them. Please, this isn't helping." "I don't care," Sophie shrieked. "They left me. My own parents left me on my wedding day." People at nearby tables were looking everywhere except at the phone, at my mother's horrified face, at the spectacle of my sister's breakdown being broadcast to my reception. This wasn't entertainment. This was a family falling apart in real time, and everyone could feel the discomfort of witnessing something so raw and private. Michael was moving toward my mother's table, his protective instincts clearly triggered, but I caught his arm, gently stopping him. "No," I said quietly. "I need to do this." He searched my face, then nodded, staying close but letting me handle it my own way. I walked across the pavilion, aware of every eye on me, feeling strangely calm despite the chaos. My mother looked up as I approached, her expression a mixture of mortification and helplessness. She tried to hand me the phone while stammering an apology, but I simply held out my hand for it. Sophie was still mid-tirade when I took the phone, her face red and blotchy, her wedding makeup ruined by hours of crying. She was still in her wedding dress, which somehow made the whole scene even sadder. When she saw my face instead of our mother's, she stopped mid-sentence. "Heather," she said, and there was venom in my name. I looked directly into the camera at my sister, who was having the worst day of her life, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction, but a deep, exhausting sadness. "Sophie," I said, my voice calm and clear enough that I knew nearby guests could hear me. "I need you to hear something, and I need you to really listen." "You ruined my wedding," she started, but I kept talking. "I didn't ruin your wedding. I didn't sabotage your electrical system. I didn't tell people to leave your ceremony. I didn't even know Mum and Dad came here until this moment." That part was true. I'd been so wrapped up in my own joy that I'd missed their brief appearance entirely. "What happened at your wedding today was the result of choices you made." "That's not fair. You chose to schedule your wedding on my date, even though I'd claimed it first. You chose to demand 200-string lights despite being warned the church couldn't handle the electrical load. You chose to treat your vendors so poorly that when things went wrong, they had no patience left for you. Those were your choices, Sophie, not mine." She was crying harder now, and I could see Brad in the background, his face exhausted and sad. "But the real problem," I continued, my voice gentle but firm, "isn't what happened today. The real problem is that you've spent your entire life believing that other people's boundaries are obstacles for you to overcome, that my needs are negotiable but yours are sacred, that if I have something good, it must somehow be taken away from you." "You always get everything," Sophie sobbed. You're smarter, you're more successful, everyone thinks you're so perfect. I'm not perfect, I interrupted. I'm just the daughter who learned that love in our family was conditional. That if I made noise or asked for things or took up space, I'd be too much trouble. So I made myself small and quiet and easy. And you know what? It didn't make Mum and Dad love me more. It just made them forget I needed love at all. My mother made a small wounded sound, but I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on Sophie. I don't want to compete with you anymore, I said. I don't want to fight about who got more attention or whose wedding was better. I want you to get help, Sophie. Real help. Because this pattern, where everything is someone else's fault and you're always the victim, it's going to destroy your marriage before it even begins. You don't understand, she started. I understand perfectly, I said. I understand that you're scared and overwhelmed and feeling out of control. I understand that being pregnant and planning a rushed wedding under pressure from Brad's family was probably terrifying. I understand all of that, and I have compassion for it. But compassion doesn't mean accepting blame for things I didn't do. I took a breath, feeling the weight of 30 years of unsaid words finally being released. What I said next, I'd been holding inside for 30 years. Sophie, you need to learn accountability, I said, and my voice was steady, not angry, but absolutely certain. What happened to you today was the result of your own choices, not my actions. But you could have changed your date. Sophie's voice was climbing toward hysteria again. You knew I was pregnant. You knew Brad's family was pressuring us. You're so selfish. You only think about yourself. The projection in that statement was so obvious that I heard someone nearby. I think it was Jennifer, make a small sound of disbelief. But I didn't get defensive or angry. I'd spent 30 years absorbing Sophie's accusations, and I was done. I chose this date a year ago, Sophie, 7 months before you even got engaged. You knew that when you chose to overlap with it. You made that choice deliberately. That was your decision, not mine. You should have been flexible. No, I interrupted firmly. I should have been respected. There's a difference. You chose St. Catherine's Church even though you knew I'd mentioned it as my childhood dream. You chose to demand electrical work that the venue couldn't support even though professionals warned you. You chose to treat your vendors so poorly that they had no patience left when things went wrong. Those were all your choices. I didn't make them. I didn't influence them. I wasn't even thinking about your wedding when I was planning mine. Sophie's face crumpled. Everyone chose you over me. They all came to your wedding instead of staying at mine. Because my wedding was happening as scheduled and yours was delayed for hours, I said gently but firmly. People made practical decisions based on the circumstances you created. That's not betrayal. That's natural consequences. I could see guests around me, some from my professional life, some family friends who'd known us for years, nodding slightly. They recognised what was happening, understood the pattern I was naming. This wasn't just about a wedding conflict. This was about a lifetime of enabling and excuse-making coming to a head. You've spent your whole life being protected from consequences. I continued, and I saw my mother flinch in my peripheral vision. Mum and Dad always fixed things for you. When you made mistakes, they blamed external circumstances. When you treated people badly, they made excuses for your behaviour. When you wanted something I had, they asked me to step aside so you could have it instead. That's not true. Sophie tried, but her voice lacked conviction. It is true, and you know it, I said, and I participated in that pattern. I made myself smaller, quieter, less demanding. I convinced myself that being the easy daughter was noble, that accommodating you was love. But all it did was teach you that other people's boundaries don't matter, as long as you're upset enough. Brad's voice came through more clearly now. Sophie, she's right. We've talked about this in therapy. You need to hear this. So they were in therapy. That was something at least. Brad was trying to help her grow, even if Sophie wasn't ready to hear it yet. I'm done participating in that pattern, I said clearly. I'm done making myself smaller so you can feel bigger. I'm done accepting blame for choices I didn't make. And I'm done pretending that your feelings are more important than mine just because you express them louder. Sophie was crying so hard now that she could barely speak. I hate you, she choked out. You've always been Mum and Dad's favourite, and now you're trying to make me look like the bad guy. The delusion in that statement was staggering Sophie, who'd been the centre of our family's universe for 29 years, claiming she'd been overlooked. But I understood it now. In her mind, any attention I received felt like theft, because she'd been conditioned to believe that all attention should be hers by default. I love you enough to tell you this truth, I said, and I meant it. You will never be happy until you stop comparing yourself to me. We're different people. We have different strengths, different paths, different lives. That's okay. That's how it should be. But your happiness cannot come from my diminishment anymore. I'm done making myself invisible so you can shine brighter. You're being cruel, Sophie sobbed. No, I said gently. I'm being honest. Cruelty would be letting you continue this pattern until it destroys your marriage and your relationship with your child. Brad loves you. He's standing by you even after today's disaster. But he can't fix you, and neither can Mum and Dad. You have to do that work yourself. I took a breath, feeling the finality of what I was about to say. I hope you do that work, Sophie. I hope you find a way to be happy without needing to be the centre of every room. I hope you build a good life with Brad and your baby. But I can't be part of your growth process if it requires me to keep sacrificing my own needs. I can't help you by continuing to hurt myself. Sophie stared at me through the screen, tears streaming down her face, mascara in dark streaks. For just a moment, I thought I saw understanding flicker in her eyes, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, I was telling her something she needed to hear. Then, her face hardened. You'll regret this, she said, her voice cold. You'll regret choosing your pride over your family. I'm choosing myself over your dysfunction, I corrected. That's not the same thing. Sophie's hand moved toward the screen. I hope you're happy, she said bitterly. I am, I said simply. For the first time in my life, I actually am. She hung up. The screen went black, and I was left holding my mother's phone in the sudden silence of the pavilion. The DJ had stopped the music at some point during the confrontation. Nearly 200 people had just witnessed me setting a boundary with my sister in the most public way possible, and I didn't regret it, not even a little. I handed the phone back to my mother and turned to face my parents, who were standing near their table looking shell-shocked and diminished. My father's face was pale. My mother was crying, but not for me, never for me. She was crying for Sophie, for the daughter whose breakdown they'd just witnessed, for the illusion of family harmony that had finally shattered completely. I looked at them both, really looked at them, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not bitterness, but a clean, clear recognition of what they were and what they'd never be. Sophie went silent. Then she hung up, and I turned to face my parents. My parents stood frozen near their table, looking smaller than I'd ever seen them. My father's hand was on my mother's shoulder, whether for support or restraint I couldn't tell. My mother's face was blotchy from crying, but her tears weren't for me, they never had been. They were for Sophie, for the spectacle we'd all just witnessed, for the family image that had shattered publicly. I walked toward them, slowly aware that every eye in the pavilion was on us, but I didn't care anymore about appearances or what people thought. I'd spent 32 years caring too much about not making waves, and look where it had gotten me. I'm not angry anymore, I said. When I reached them, my voice measured and calm. Not yelling, not emotional, just absolutely certain. But you need to know what your choices taught me. My father opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. Please, let me finish. I've been quiet my entire life. Today, you're going to listen." The silence stretched between us, broken only by the gentle lap of water against the shore and the distant sound of someone quietly crying. I gathered the words I'd held inside for 3 decades, feeling their weight, preparing to finally release them. "You taught me that love was something I could earn if I was just good enough, quiet enough, successful enough. So I became all of those things. I got straight A's, I won awards, I built a career, I became independent and self-sufficient. And no matter what I achieved, it was never enough to make you see me the way you saw Sophie." My mother's face crumpled. "Heather, I'm not finished," I said firmly, and she stopped. "You taught me that Sophie needed you more, not because she was more deserving, not because she was struggling in ways I wasn't, but simply because she demanded attention and I didn't. She cried louder, so you came running. She made messes, so you cleaned them up. She needed rescue, so you became rescuers." I could see recognition dawning on my father's face, not defensiveness yet, but the beginning of understanding. And what did I learn from that? I learned to make myself small. I learned that asking for things made me a burden. I learned that expressing needs made me selfish. I learned that the way to earn love was to require as little as possible while giving as much as I could. My voice didn't waver. I'd rehearsed these words in therapy, written them in my journal, imagined saying them 1,000 times. But I'd never believed I'd actually have the courage until this moment. "We always loved you both equally." My mother tried again, the automatic defense mechanism kicking in. "Don't," I interrupted, my tone still calm but unyielding. "Don't diminish what I'm saying by pretending it isn't true. You didn't love us equally. You might have felt love equally, but you didn't show it equally. And what matters isn't what you felt in your hearts, it's what we experienced in our lives." My father's eyes were red, now tears threatening to spill over. "Today wasn't about revenge," I continued. "I didn't plan this beautiful wedding to hurt Sophie, or show you what you were missing. I planned it because Michael and I deserved to be celebrated. Because Eleanor saw my worth when you couldn't. Because Lily needed me in ways that reminded me I was valuable. Because I finally understood that I don't need your approval to be worthy." I gestured around the pavilion, to the elegant setting, to the guests who'd come to celebrate us, to the life I'd built without their support. Eleanor saw that. Michael saw that. Lily saw that. My colleagues saw that. Even people who barely know me saw that I deserved this kind of celebration. But you never did. You assumed I'd be fine with a small, quiet wedding because I was always fine with less. You withdrew your financial support as punishment for not bending to Sophie's demands. You chose to attend her wedding over mine without even asking if that choice would hurt me. My mother was crying openly now. We thought you didn't need us." "I always needed you," I said, and my voice finally cracked with emotion. "I just learned not to show it. There's a difference between not needing and not asking. I stopped asking because I learned that asking meant being disappointed. The truth of that statement hung in the air between us. My father put his face in his hands. "But here's what's going to change," I said, straightening my shoulders. "If you want to be part of my life going forward, and that's an if not a guarantee, you need to see me as I actually am. Not as the easy daughter who requires nothing. Not as the responsible one who always has everything figured out. Not as the backup plan when Sophie's drama gets too exhausting." I paused, making sure they were really hearing me. "I have needs too. I have feelings too. I have a right to be celebrated, prioritized, and valued just as much as Sophie, and I will not accept being treated as less important ever again. Those are my terms for having any relationship with you moving forward." My mother reached for my hand, but I stepped back, not cruelly, but with clear boundary. "I'm not saying I'll never forgive you," I said more gently. "I'm not saying our relationship can't heal, but I am saying that healing requires you to acknowledge what happened, change your behavior, and prove over time that you can see me differently. Words aren't enough anymore. I need to see changed actions. What do you want from us? My father asked, his voice broken. I want you to go back to Sophie's reception, I said. She needs you right now, and I don't. I have everyone I need here. I gestured to Michael, who was watching from a respectful distance, to Eleanor, to the friends and colleagues who'd become my chosen family. Go be with the daughter who's falling apart. I'll be here with the people who celebrate me when I'm standing strong. My mother looked stricken. Heather, please. Go, I said firmly. We'll talk another day when emotions aren't so raw. But today is my wedding day, and I want to spend it with people who wanted to be here from the beginning. They stood there for another moment, clearly torn between staying and going, between defending themselves and accepting responsibility. Finally, my father nodded, took my mother's hand, and they walked toward the parking area. I watched them leave, feeling the weight of 30 years lifting off my shoulders. Around me, the reception slowly came back to life. Someone signalled the DJ, who started the music again at a respectful volume. Guests began moving, talking in low voices, processing what they had witnessed. Michael appeared at my side, not asking if I was okay, but simply being present. I leaned into him and he wrapped his arms around me. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, he whispered. Eleanor approached from my other side, her expression proud and sad and understanding all at once. You did beautifully, dear. Setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's self-preservation. The reception continued around us, but our family had fundamentally shifted. Later that evening, Eleanor gave me something that changed everything again. The reception had shifted after the confrontation, becoming something quieter and more intimate. The remaining guests, those who'd chosen to stay, after witnessing my family's public unravelling, seemed to understand me better now. There was less performance in the conversations, less small talk. People approached me with genuine warmth, some sharing their own stories of difficult family dynamics, others simply squeezing my hand in silent support. By 8 o'clock, the sun had fully set, and the estate was illuminated entirely by fairy lights and candles. The temperature had dropped to something comfortable, and a gentle breeze came off the lake. Most of the older guests had already left, and those remaining were the closest friends, the people who felt more like family than obligation. I was sitting at a table with Michael and Lily, the three of us sharing a slice of wedding cake, and watching the last few couples dance when Eleanor approached with something I hadn't seen before. An aged envelope, its edges yellowed with time, my name written across the front in handwriting. I recognised immediately. My grandmother's handwriting. Heather, dear, Eleanor said softly, could you spare a few minutes? There's something I need to give you, something I've been holding on to for the right moment. I followed her away from the pavilion down a stone path that led to a small gazebo overlooking the water. The sounds of the reception faded behind us, leaving only the gentle lap of waves and the distant call of night birds. Eleanor held out the envelope with both hands, as if it were precious and fragile. Your grandmother gave this to me 2 years before she passed from cancer. She asked me to deliver it on your wedding day. My hands trembled as I took it, feeling the weight of paper that had been waiting for this exact moment. Why you? I asked, not accusingly, but genuinely curious. Why not give it to my parents to hold? Eleanor's expression was sad, but knowing. She knew she wouldn't live to see this day. The cancer was already advanced when she wrote this. And she was very clear about why she chose me. She said, if I give this to Jim and Carol, they'll either lose it, forget about it, or read it and decide Heather doesn't need it. Give it to Eleanor. She sees my granddaughter the way I do. I felt tears already forming. My grandmother had died when I was 26, 6 years ago. She'd been the one person in my family who'd consistently noticed me, who'd asked about my work and my dreams, who'd seemed genuinely interested in who I was becoming. We'd become friends through your design project at my house, Eleanor continued. Your grandmother came to visit one afternoon when you were presenting plans to me. She saw how you lit up talking about your work, how I valued your expertise. After you left, she said to me, "That's the real Heather, the one her parents never see because they're always looking at Sophie." We had tea several times after that, and 3 months before she passed, she gave me this letter. My fingers carefully opened the envelope, being gentle with paper that had been sealed for over 6 years. Inside was a single sheet, the handwriting shaky in places, evidence of illness, but still unmistakably my grandmother's. "My dearest Heather," it began, and I had to sit down on the gazebo bench before continuing. "I see you, I always have. I see how you were overlooked, how you made yourself small, how you stopped asking for what you needed. I see how you perfected the art of being easy, undemanding, self-sufficient, and I'm ashamed that I didn't intervene more forcefully. I told myself you were strong enough without my help, that speaking up would only make things worse for you. But I was wrong. Strength shouldn't mean isolation. Being capable shouldn't mean being ignored." I was crying now, the tears falling onto the paper. Eleanor sat beside me quietly, her presence supportive, but not intrusive. The letter continued. "I've watched your parents raise 2 daughters completely differently. Sophie got their worry, their attention, their constant intervention. You got their assumptions that you were fine, that you'd figure it out, that you didn't need the same level of care. They mistook your resilience for not needing support. They confused your quietness with not having needs." My grandmother's words were validating something I'd felt, but never been able to articulate clearly. It wasn't that my parents didn't love me, it was that they'd fundamentally misunderstood what I needed. "But here's what I want you to know, my darling girl." The letter continued, and I could almost hear her voice warm and slightly raspy. "You were born as light, bright, brilliant, capable light. Don't let anyone dim that. Don't let their blindness make you invisible. Don't let their inability to see you make you doubt your own luminescence." The next paragraph was shorter, written in slightly stronger hand, as if she'd gathered her strength for this final message. "Shine, my darling. Shine so bright that even those who couldn't see you must finally open their eyes. Take up space. Demand attention. Ask for what you need. Love someone who celebrates your light instead of asking you to dim it. Build a life so full and rich that their approval becomes irrelevant. You were always enough. You were always more than enough. You are my legacy, Heather. Make me proud by being unapologetically yourself." It was signed simply, "Love your Nana." I folded the letter against my chest and sobbed, not sad tears, but releasing tears, healing tears. This woman had seen me, had understood what I needed to hear, had known years before I did that I would need permission to take up space, to shine, to stop making myself small. Eleanor wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "She was an extraordinary woman," she said quietly, "and she was right about you. You've become exactly who she hoped you would be." "I wish she was here," I whispered. "She is," Eleanor said, "in the strength you showed today, in the boundaries you set, in the life you've built. She's here in every way that matters." We sat in the gazebo for several more minutes, looking out at the lake where the moon was beginning to rise, painting a silver path across the water. Behind us, the reception continued with the people who'd chosen to celebrate us, the people who saw our light and wanted to be near it. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into its envelope. This would go in a frame, would hang in our home, would remind me on hard days that I'd been seen and valued by someone who mattered. Michael appeared at the gazebo entrance, giving us space but checking if I was okay. I waved him over and showed him the letter. He read it silently, then pulled me close, kissing the top of my head. "Your grandmother was wise," he said simply. I folded the letter against my chest and cried, finally feeling truly seen by someone in my blood family. But Sophie's story wasn't over yet. The week after my wedding, I learned through Jennifer that Sophie's ceremony had finally taken place the following Saturday, exactly 1 week after the original date, and 1 week after everything had fallen apart so publicly. I was back from our honeymoon in the San Juan Islands, unpacking wedding gifts in the home Michael and I had decided to make ours, when Jennifer called with an update I hadn't asked for but somehow needed to hear. "I thought you should know," she said carefully, "that Sophie's wedding happened yesterday. It was smaller than planned." "How small?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than vindictive. About 60 people showed up, half the original guest list, and Heather Brad's family insisted they do couples therapy for at least 3 months before they'd support the marriage financially. His mother was apparently very firm about it, said she wouldn't watch her son marry someone who wasn't ready for the commitment. I sat down on our living room floor, surrounded by wrapped boxes and tissue paper processing this information. Part of me felt vindicated Sophie was finally facing real consequences. Consequences that couldn't be explained away or blamed on me. But another part of me just felt sad for her for the wedding day she'd destroyed through her own choices for the reality she'd have to confront whether she was ready or not. 2 days later, I received a text from Sophie. I'd been expecting it, anger, blame, accusations. What surprised me was how long it had taken her to reach out. "You destroyed my life. Everyone thinks I'm crazy now because of that video. Brad's family hates me and won't even talk about helping with the wedding costs. His mother treats me like I'm unstable. People at work have seen it and whisper when I walk by. This is all your fault. You planned this. You wanted to humiliate me." I read the message 3 times, feeling that old familiar tug the instinct to defend myself, to explain, to try to make her understand. But I'd done that already publicly at my reception. There was nothing more to say. I took a breath, looked at the wedding photo Michael had already framed, and placed on our mantel the 2 of us laughing by the lake Lily. Between us, all 3 of us radiant with genuine joy, and typed a simple response. "I hope therapy helps you, Sophie. I mean that, sincerely." I didn't explain that I hadn't filmed the video or shared it. I didn't remind her that she'd created her own crisis by ignoring professional advice. I didn't point out that she was still blaming me for consequences she'd brought on herself. I just offered the only thing I had left to give her hope that she'd get the help she needed. She didn't respond. I didn't expect her to. The following week, both my parents called. I let the first few calls go to voicemail, listening later to messages that were variations on the same theme. Sophie was struggling, the family was fractured. Couldn't I please reach out to her, be the bigger person, help smooth things over? Finally, I answered when my mother called for the 4th time. "Heather, thank God," she said when I picked up. "We need to talk about Sophie. She's not doing well. The video has been so hard on her, and Brad's family is being very rigid about the therapy requirement. She needs her sister right now. She needs you to forgive her and help her through this." "No," I said simply. The silence on the other end was profound. "What do you mean, no?" my mother finally asked. "I mean, I'm done being the bigger person if that means making myself smaller. Sophie doesn't need my forgiveness right now. She needs professional help. She needs to learn accountability. She needs to understand that actions have consequences. And she can't learn any of that if I swoop in to make everything okay." "But you're her sister, and you're her mother," I interrupted. "But being family doesn't mean enabling destructive behavior. It doesn't mean protecting someone from reality. Sometimes love means letting people face the natural consequences of their choices." "This is so," called Heather, "so unlike you." I almost laughed at that. "No, Mom, this is exactly like me. You just never paid enough attention to see it. I've always had boundaries. I've always had limits. I just never enforced them before because I was too afraid of disappointing you or causing conflict. I'm not afraid anymore." "What happened to you?" my mother asked, and she sounded genuinely bewildered. I chose myself, I said gently. For the first time in my life, I chose my own peace over your comfort. And I'm going to keep making that choice until you can show me that you've changed too. I hung up before she could respond. Through Jennifer, who remained my connection to family news without being a flying monkey, I learned more about Sophie's situation over the following months. Brad had indeed insisted on therapy, not couples therapy initially, but individual therapy for Sophie to address what his family diplomatically called stress management issues. But what was really her inability to take responsibility for her own behaviour. Sophie had resisted at first, Jennifer told me, insisting she didn't need therapy, that everyone was overreacting, that the video had been taken out of context. But Brad had been firm in a way that surprised everyone who knew him. He'd apparently said, and this got back to me through the family whisper network, that he loved Sophie, but wouldn't marry someone who couldn't acknowledge their own role in creating problems. Jennifer also mentioned that Brad's mother had seen the pattern clearly, a young woman who'd been enabled her entire life, protected from consequences, taught that other people's boundaries were negotiable. She told Brad, according to family gossip, that Sophie needed to grow up before she'd be ready to be a partner and a mother. For the first time in her life, Sophie couldn't escape consequences by crying to our parents or blaming someone else. The video existed. The witnesses existed. The pattern was too clear to deny. I didn't take satisfaction in her struggle, but I didn't feel guilty about it either. This was her journey, not mine. My responsibility was to protect my own peace, not to sacrifice it to maintain the illusion of family harmony. Michael watched me navigate these weeks with quiet support. One evening, as we were cooking dinner together in our kitchen in our home, the life we were building, he asked how I was really feeling about everything. I feel free, I said honestly. Sad sometimes, but free. Like I've been carrying a weight I didn't even know was there, and now it's gone. He kissed my forehead. Good, that's how it should feel. 6 months passed. I didn't know if anything had truly changed until Thanksgiving dinner. The invitation came in early February, a handwritten card from my mother that arrived in our mailbox, nestled between bills and grocery store circulars. The handwriting was careful, almost hesitant, so different from the confident script I remembered from childhood. Dear Heather, Michael and Lily, it read, we'd like to invite you to a family dinner on February 22nd. We're calling it our Thanksgiving dinner since we missed the actual holiday due to Sophie's pregnancy complications. We understand if you're not ready, but we'd very much like to see you. No pressure, just hope. Love, Mum and Dad. I stood in our kitchen, holding the card, reading it multiple times, looking for hidden manipulation or obligation. Michael came up behind me, reading over my shoulder. What do you want to do? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to throw this away and keep the boundaries I've built. But another part is curious if anything has actually changed, or if this is just them wanting things to go back to normal without doing the work. There's only one way to find out, Michael said, but whatever you decide, we're with you. I talked it through with my therapist, who reminded me that testing boundaries doesn't mean abandoning them. You can go to dinner and still leave if it becomes toxic, she said. You can try, and if it doesn't work, you can walk away knowing you gave them a chance. So I accepted, but with clear conditions. We'd arrive at 6 and leave by 8, no matter what. If things became uncomfortable, we'd excuse ourselves without apology, and under no circumstances would I apologise for anything that happened on my wedding day. Michael agreed to all of it, and Lily, who'd been briefed on the complicated family dynamics in age-appropriate terms, promised she'd be on her best but honest behaviour. The dinner was at my parents' house, the same suburban home where I'd grown up feeling invisible. Walking up the familiar driveway felt surreal, like stepping into a memory that didn't quite fit anymore. My mother opened the door before we could knock, and I saw immediately that she'd been nervous about our arrival. Her smile was uncertain, hopeful, almost tentative, an expression I'd never seen on her face before. "Heather," she said, and her voice caught. "Thank you for coming. Michael Lily, welcome. Please, come in." The house smelled like roasted turkey and my mother's signature cranberry sauce. The dining room table was set carefully with the good china that usually only came out for major holidays. My father emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron, which was so unusual I almost laughed he'd never been involved in dinner preparation before. "Heather," he said, wiping his hands on a towel before approaching cautiously, as if I might bolt. "I'm glad you came." Then Sophie appeared from the living room, and I had to consciously keep my expression neutral. She was 8 months pregnant, her belly prominent under a simple maternity dress. But what struck me more than the pregnancy was how different she looked in other ways. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no elaborate styling. Her makeup was minimal, just enough to look put together, not the full face I remembered from every family gathering. She looked tired, yes, but also somehow more present, more real than I'd seen her in years. Brad was right behind her, his hand protectively on her lower back. He nodded to me with a respect I hadn't seen before, and I realised he saw me differently now, not as the sister who should accommodate Sophie, but as the woman who'd set necessary boundaries. The first 30 minutes were awkward, but not hostile. We sat in the living room making careful small talk. My parents asked about Michael's work, complimented how grown-up Lily looked, mentioned that they'd heard my design firm had won an award recently. It was surface level, but it was also attention questions directed at me rather than just through me to get to Sophie. When my mother announced dinner was ready, Sophie asked if I'd help her in the kitchen for a moment. My instinct was to decline to maintain distance, but something in her expression, vulnerability maybe, or genuine nervousness made me agree. In the kitchen, with the door swung, mostly closed, Sophie stood by the sink, her hands gripping the counter edge. She didn't look at me immediately, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet, almost flat, the tone of someone who'd rehearsed words in therapy and was forcing themselves to say them despite discomfort. "My therapist said I need to apologise without excuses," she began, still not meeting my eyes. "So I'm not going to explain why I did what I did, or try to make you understand my perspective. I'm just going to say this, I'm sorry. I was awful to you. For years, but especially around the wedding, I sabotaged your vendors. I tried to steal your date. I spread rumours about Michael. I blamed you for consequences I created. I was selfish and cruel and completely unable to see how much I was hurting you." She finally looked up and her eyes were red but dry, as if she'd cried all her tears in therapy sessions and had none left for this moment. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she continued. "I don't expect us to be close again or maybe ever. But I needed to say it. You deserved better than how I treated you. You always did." I stood there processing this apology that contained no deflection. No, but you have to understand. No minimizing or excuse-making. It was simple and honest, and probably the hardest thing Sophie had ever said. "Thank you for saying that," I said carefully. "I'm not ready to say it's okay, because it wasn't okay, but I appreciate that you're working on yourself. That matters." Sophie nodded, looking almost relieved to not be immediately forgiven, as if that would have been too easy. Brad's been really clear that if I don't change, our marriage won't survive. His family saw the video. They saw who I was. I can't unsee it now either. We carried dishes to the dining room in silence, but it wasn't the hostile silence of before. It was just space, room for both of us to exist without competing. Dinner itself was remarkable, mainly for what didn't happen. My parents didn't spend the entire meal focused on Sophie's pregnancy or wedding or drama. They asked Michael about a business project Jennifer had mentioned. They asked me about the Eleanor Whitmore project that had been featured in a design magazine. They complimented the green beans Lily helped prepare, making her beam with pride. When Sophie talked about her pregnancy, it was brief and factual due date. Doctor's appointments, nursery preparations, and then the conversation moved on to other topics. My mother asked about our honeymoon. My father wanted to know if Michael still played basketball on weekends. It was far from perfect. There were awkward pauses and careful word choices. My mother still deferred to Sophie more than to me. My father still seemed uncomfortable with direct emotional conversation. But there was effort, visible, genuine effort, to see me, to include my family, to acknowledge that my life mattered too. At one point, Lily, who'd been quietly observing all the adult dynamics, with her perceptive 8-year-old awareness, looked at my mother and asked with that direct honesty children have, "Can I call you Grandma now? Or do I have to keep saying, Mrs. Simmons?" My mother's face crumpled. She set down her fork, tears streaming down her cheeks, and nodded so vigorously she couldn't speak. When she finally found words, they came out choked with emotion. Yes, sweetheart, I would be honoured if you called me Grandma." Lily, satisfied with this answer, went back to her mashed potatoes, as if she hadn't just shattered and rebuilt something fundamental. Michael reached under the table and squeezed my hand. We left at 8, as planned, citing Lily's school night bedtime. The goodbyes were tentative but warm. My mother hugged me carefully, as if afraid I might break or pull away. My father said, "Can we do this again? Maybe monthly?" I said, "Maybe. Let's see how it goes." And in the car driving home, Lily fell asleep in the back seat. Michael asked the question I'd been asking myself. "How do you feel?" "I don't know yet," I said honestly. It wasn't perfect. We're not magically healed. But for the first time, I felt like I was at a table where I belonged. Driving home through the February darkness with Lily, asleep in the back seat, and Michael's hand resting on my knee, I found myself thinking about a therapy session from almost a year ago, 3 months before my wedding, when I'd been wrestling with whether I even wanted my family at the ceremony. I'd been sitting in Dr. Martinez's office, tears streaming down my face, trying to articulate a question I'd been circling for weeks. If I forgive them, I'd finally asked, doesn't that mean they win? That they were right to treat me this way? That all those years of being overlooked and dismissed were somehow okay? Dr. Martinez had leaned forward in her chair, her expression patient and kind. "Heather, forgiveness isn't for them. It's for you. It's not saying what they did was right or acceptable. It's choosing not to let their actions define your future. It's deciding that you won't carry their toxicity forward into the life you're building." At the time, I hadn't fully understood. Forgiveness felt like surrender, like saying the hurt didn't matter. "I see the confusion on your face," Dr. Martinez had continued. "So let me be very clear about something crucial. You can forgive and still have boundaries. In fact, boundaries are what make forgiveness sustainable. Forgiveness means, I won't let this poison me anymore. Boundaries mean, I won't let this happen again." They're not contradictory, they're complementary. She'd drawn 2 overlapping circles on her notepad, labeling one forgiveness and the other boundaries. Forgiveness releases you from the past. Boundaries protect you in the present and future. You need both. Forgiveness without boundaries is just enabling. Boundaries without forgiveness is just building walls that keep you prisoner with your anger. I'd stared at those circles for a long time, feeling something shift in my understanding. "So, I can forgive my parents for 30 years of favouritism?" I'd said, slowly testing the concept, but still refused to accept being treated that way going forward. Exactly. You can acknowledge their humanity, understand they did the best they knew how, with the tools they had, maybe even feel compassion for the ways they were limited by their own upbringing, and still say, that treatment is unacceptable, and I won't participate in it anymore. That conversation had been the foundation for everything that followed. It's what allowed me to send the calm text saying I was keeping my wedding date. It's what gave me the strength to speak my truth at the reception. And it's what allowed me to accept tonight's dinner invitation without betraying myself. Back at the dinner table earlier this evening, I'd seen that framework tested in real time. We'd been finishing dessert when my mother, in what seemed like an attempt at connection, had said brightly, "Heather, you're so organised. Maybe you could help Sophie set up the nursery. She's feeling overwhelmed with all the planning." The old Heather would have immediately agreed, grateful to be included, eager to be helpful, not wanting to cause tension. But the new Heather, the one who'd learned about complementary circles of forgiveness and boundaries, paused before responding. "I'm happy to give advice if Sophie asks me directly," I'd said gently but clearly. "But I won't take over her responsibilities. She's capable of planning for her own child. And honestly, Mum, I think it's important for Sophie to learn to manage these things herself, rather than having someone swoop in to rescue her." My mother had looked slightly taken aback, and I'd seen Sophie's face flush. But Brad had nodded approvingly, and after a moment, Sophie had said quietly, "She's right. I need to figure this out myself." It was a small moment easily overlooked, but it represented everything, me stating a boundary clearly, not harshly. My family hearing it without exploding. Sophie acknowledging it without deflecting. The pattern interrupted, even if just for a moment. Michael had caught my eye across the table and given me the smallest nod of support. He understood what that moment cost and what it meant. Now, driving through the quiet streets toward our home, I understood something Dr. Martinez had tried to tell me months ago, but that I'd needed to experience to really comprehend. Healing isn't a destination. It's not something you arrive at and then you're done. It's a choice you make every single day, sometimes every single hour, not to fall back into old patterns. Some days I'll succeed at maintaining boundaries while offering grace. Some days I'll fail and either be too harsh or too accommodating. Some days I'll want to cut off contact entirely. Some days I'll feel hopeful about reconciliation. All of those feelings can coexist, and none of them make me a bad person or mean I'm doing it wrong. The work isn't about being perfect. It's about being intentional. Tonight was one evening, one dinner where my family made visible effort. That didn't erase 32 years of favoritism, didn't undo the pain of them choosing Sophie's wedding over mine, didn't magically heal all the ways I'd been overlooked. But it was a beginning. A tentative, imperfect, fragile beginning. And I could honour that beginning while still protecting myself. I could appreciate my mother's tears when Lily called her grandma while still remembering that she'd dismissed Michael and called my wedding less important. I could acknowledge Sophie's genuine apology while still maintaining distance until I saw sustained change, not just one moment of clarity. This is what Dr. Martinez meant about forgiveness being for me. I wasn't forgiving them because they'd earned it, or because they'd suffered enough, or because enough time had passed. I was choosing to forgive slowly, carefully, with boundaries intact, because I didn't want to carry the weight of that anger into the beautiful life I was building with Michael and Lily. But I also wasn't naive. I knew that one good dinner didn't mean everything was fixed. I knew my parents might slip back into old patterns. I knew Sophie's therapy might not stick, that the pressure of new motherhood might trigger old behaviours. I knew that testing these renewed relationships would require constant vigilance, constant choice, constant recommitment to my own boundaries. "You're quiet," Michael said, glancing over at me. "Processing." "Yeah," I said, thinking about how hard this is, not tonight specifically, but all of it, trying to stay open to the possibility of healing while protecting myself from more hurt. It feels like walking a tightrope. "It is a tightrope," Michael agreed, "but you don't have to walk it alone. I'm right here, and I'll tell you if I see you starting to slip back into old patterns." I squeezed his hand gratefully. This was the gift of chosen family people who loved me enough to celebrate my boundaries rather than asking me to dismantle them. I thought about my grandmother's letter still framed on our bedroom wall. "Shine, my darling, shine so bright that even those who couldn't see you must finally open their eyes." Tonight, maybe my parents' eyes had opened just a crack. Maybe Sophie's had too. Maybe that crack would widen into real seeing, or maybe it would close again. Either way, I was done dimming my light to make their adjustment easier. I was finally living for myself, not for their approval. And that shift, that fundamental reorientation of who I was living for, was the real transformation. Everything else was just details. That night, driving home, with my new family, I realised something profound. What I realised that night and what became clearer over the following year was this: the most radical act of self-love isn't grand gestures or dramatic statements. It's the quiet, daily choice to stop waiting for permission to matter. Now, 1 year after my wedding day, I stood on the lawn of Whitmore Estate, once again watching the same lake shimmer in the same August afternoon light. Eleanor had gifted us a weekend stay to celebrate our first anniversary, and everything felt both familiar and transformed. Lily, now 9, was teaching a visiting neighbour's daughter how to skip stones across the water. She'd stopped saying "Mom, Heather" somewhere around month 3 of our marriage, and now just called me Mum, with the casual certainty of a child who'd never questioned where she belonged. Michael found me standing there, wrapped his arms around me from behind. "What are you thinking about?" "How much has changed?" I said, "and how much hasn't?" The year had been one of cautious rebuilding. My parents visited monthly, now always on my terms, always with clear boundaries. They came to Lily's school play. They remembered my birthday for the first time in a decade. They asked about my work with genuine interest and actually listened to the answers. It wasn't the relationship I'd once dreamed of. There was too much history, too much damage that couldn't be undone. But it was becoming something real and honest. We were learning to love each other as we actually were, not as we'd wished each other would be. Sophie had given birth to a daughter in April, a beautiful girl named Emma. Yesterday, on the eve of my anniversary, I'd received a text from Sophie that made me cry. It was a photo of Emma, 6 months old, and smiling with a message: "Thank you for not enabling me. Therapy is hard, but I'm finally seeing myself clearly. I want to be a better mother than we had for both of us. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying. I hope you're happy, Heather. I mean that." It wasn't a request for forgiveness or an attempt to rebuild closeness. It was just acknowledgement, honesty, and hope. Real growth, not instant perfection. And that was enough. The biggest change of the past year had been professional. 3 months after the wedding, Eleanor had invested in my own design firm, one that specialised in transformative spaces for new beginnings, helping people rebuilding their lives, redesign their environments to reflect who they were becoming. "You understand transformation," Eleanor had said. "You've lived it." Oh, Simmons Design Studio was born, and it had exceeded every expectation. Each project felt like an extension of my own journey. My success was mine built on my own merit, supported by people who celebrated rather than diminished me. Standing on this lawn, where I'd married Michael, where I'd confronted my family, where I'd finally chosen myself, I understood what I needed to share. People ask me if I regret not changing my wedding date, if standing my ground was worth the family fracture it caused. And I tell them, they're asking the wrong question. I didn't lose my family that day. I discovered they were never mine in the way I needed them to be. And in that painful discovery, I found something far more valuable. I found myself. For 30 years, I tried to earn love by making myself smaller, quieter, easier to overlook. I'd believed that if I were just good enough, achieved enough, caused little enough trouble, I'd finally deserve the attention that came so easily to Sophie. But love that requires you to shrink isn't love at all. It's a transaction. And I'd finally stopped paying a price I never owed. I forgave my family, not because they'd earned it, but because I deserved the peace that forgiveness brings. I set boundaries not to punish them, but to protect the self-worth I'd fought so hard to reclaim. And I built a new life, not to show them what they'd missed, but because I'd finally understood that I deserved to live fully, loudly, unapologetically. August 15th last year wasn't just the day I got married. It was the day I chose myself. And that choice had saved my life in ways I was still discovering. "Mum," Lily called from the water's edge. "Come, try. I can teach you to skip stones." I walked down to join her, Michael beside me, and spent the next hour learning something I'd never made time for as a child. When I finally got a stone to skip twice before sinking, We all cheered like I'd won an Olympic medal. This was my life now. Small moments of joy with people who celebrated my victories no matter how modest. Quiet evenings in the home we'd built together. Work that fed my soul. Boundaries that protected my peace. And slowly, carefully, the tentative rebuilding of family relationships on terms that honoured my worth. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed, and Michael and I sat on Eleanor's terrace watching the stars, I thought about the women who might hear my story, the daughters who feel invisible, the sisters overshadowed, the people who've spent lifetimes making themselves small in hopes of being loved. I wanted them to know, you are not selfish for wanting to be seen. You are not difficult for requiring respect. You are not wrong for taking up space. Those are lies told by people who benefit from your diminishment. The people who truly love you won't ask you to dim your light so they can shine brighter. They won't require you to make yourself smaller so they can feel bigger. They'll celebrate your brightness. They'll make room for your growth. They'll choose you, not despite your fullness, but because of it. And the day you stop waiting for permission to be yourself, permission from parents who can't see you, from siblings who compete with you, from anyone invested in keeping you small, that's the day you're finally free. I looked at Michael, who was looking at me with quiet adoration. I thought about Lily sleeping peacefully upstairs, secure in knowing she was wanted. I thought about Eleanor, who'd seen my worth when my own family couldn't. I thought about Sophie's text and my parents' slow, imperfect progress. And I understood this was what choosing myself had given me. Not perfection, not the family I'd once dreamed of, but something real, something earned, something that couldn't be taken away by someone else's inability to see my value. I was born as light, just as my grandmother had written. And I'd finally stopped letting anyone convince me otherwise. Happy anniversary, Michael whispered, pulling me close. Happy anniversary, I replied and meant it with every cell of my body. This was the life I'd chosen. This was the self I'd reclaimed. This was the freedom I'd won. And I would never, ever make myself small again. So that's my story. The story of how I stopped being invisible and started being seen. The story of how one wedding date became the battleground where I finally chose myself over a lifetime of being overlooked. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the invisible child, the accommodating sibling, the person who makes themselves smaller so others can shine brighter, I want you to know something. Your feelings are valid, your needs matter, and you deserve to take up space without apologizing for it. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who expected you to always be the flexible one? How did you handle being the overlooked sibling or the child who was always expected to understand? What would you have done in my situation? And most importantly, what's one way you've chosen yourself recently? No matter how small, your stories matter to me. Every comment, every shared experience helps build a community of people who understand that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's self-preservation. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. That you can love your family and still protect yourself from their dysfunction. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story about standing up, speaking out, and choosing yourself. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're not wrong for wanting to be valued. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And remember, you were born as light. Don't let anyone dim that. The day you stop waiting for permission to matter is the day you're finally free. Until next time, keep shining.